What's up, y'all?
Hey y'all. Millennials are killing capitalism. You was here real early.
Yeah.
3:31. Hey Alex. I don't know if that's Jay or Josh or both, but what's up, y'all?
Oh man.
I can't believe it's already April, bro.
Listen, it's like time is very fast and very slow at the same time, and it's
Hmm.
frustrating.
They say the days are long, but the years are short.
Yes.
I understand that completely.
Hmm.
Hey, Chiramacha. Wagwan.
I have a student that is thinking about Bob Marley lyrics and Pan Africanism for their final project. When you just said it, made me think about the project they're thinking about doing for the final.
You should tell them to read Black Heretics, Black Prophets
Okay.
by Tony Bogues.
Okay.
He has a chapter on Bob Marley. That's good. Hey, James. James, you must work for Black Power Media. That's why you got the
That is
gang, got the hammer and the wrench. Sneaky Minaj. Hey, Elon. Hey, the Jaman. Not any Jaman, the Jaman. Cynical. Hey, Leah. Hey, Lisa.
more security.
Security. Security. By the way, did you go to that meeting? The platform meeting that was like a
I
couple weeks
did,
ago?
I did,
You
but
never gave me the update. CBS is I'm absolutely not a barb. I don't believe in stan culture,
I
except for
did.
Gerald Horn.
I think I was doing. I was doing stuff during the meeting, so I didn't have a whole lot to report. But there was
Mhm.
what's her name sent something today for us to vote on.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that. I'm like, should I still do I get to vote even though I didn't go? But I maybe it's clear as to what we're voting on.
Yeah.
I feel like I offered up my perspective in the last meeting. Yipper 99. Hey.
All right. Want to get started?
402. Yeah, we can get started. Okay, so starting with life. So I interviewed for a thing yesterday, y'all. Wish me luck. Send me if you riding with the kid, drop a shamrock. No, drop a red, black, and green flag in the chat. And if they don't have
What?
that, drop
How
a
you gonna bring
shamrock.
rock to a red, black, and green
A
flag?
shamrock shake. Yeah, drop the shamrock or the red, black, and green flag to wish me luck. I should know whether or not I got it by our next show, so I'll give you an update and more details then. I'm very excited that my faves, a bunch of my faves, are getting into graduate school or got into graduate school and then making their selections. It's not a whole bunch of them. There's only sort of three that I wrote letters for or supported. And so they're making their final decisions. That's very exciting, even though, academia is going pear shaped. It's still exciting that, and they're doing excellent projects that are worthwhile to be doing in academia, and they have good politics. So I'm very happy for them. So y'all, me and Layla talked about the medium 75 challenge that we did, and so now I'm following this guy named Eric Roberts on Instagram, and so I decided he was talking about this 8-week challenge, so I decided to do it. And basically, like you kind of like work with the trainer. It's all virtual, but you work with the trainer. They make you like a diet plan or meal plan situation, and then give you workouts and how to do like all these measurements and take pictures and all that stuff. And so, um, thanks, Yippers. That was the best of both worlds. And so I'm doing that. So I should have my plan by tomorrow, and hopefully that goes well. I just noticed myself, I was kind of like slacking off. I mean, I'll go to the gym no matter what, but I know I was drinking not a lot, but I was having alcohol and kind of slacking off with stuff. So I'm like, let me keep the momentum going. So that should be good. I am looking forward to see how that goes. And then I am like at the tail end of like talk season. I had a whole bunch of shit. I had my talk at the People's Forum. I had the Malcolm X Symposium, which went really well. It was great to I saw some homies like PM Irvin, and then Reese. I don't know why Reese's last name is eluding me right now. A graduate student in philosophy at MSU is the one that invited me, and we worked together on this Harry Haywood committee. So it was great to meet him in person. So that was a great time, and I also got to see Akinyele Umoja, even though he was there. He was the keynote on Saturday. I ended up leaving Saturday morning to go to my other talk, which is at the National Council for Black Studies. That panel also went well. I mean, I still got mixed feelings about the National Council for Black Studies for a number of reasons, but that particular what was it called? The plenary session went really well. I was, talking shit. So that was cool. And then I had a talk at Wayne State. I was asked to do a talk about Black Scare, Red Scare, and its meanings for the present. And that was cool. It was very well attended, actually. And it wasn't just somebody's class. There was like 10 people from David's class, my colleague David Goldberg, but there was pretty well attended. And then now on Sunday, I'm going to Oklahoma State to do a talk on Monday. So coming to the end. We're also coming to the end of the semester, which is great. And then I just wanted to make an announcement that the Scholars for Social Justice are having an event this evening. They're calling it a National Town Hall at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. But Scholars for Social Justice is basically the left-ish contingency, a leftist contingency of scholars in academia. And essentially they're talking about academic freedom being under attack and how to fight back. So if anybody is in academia or just are interested in academia, pull up. It's at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, I saw that. I was trying to decide if I was gonna tap in, but I'm probably not, just because after being on here for 2 hours, I just want to get off the computer. But for me, today was supposed to be a good day, but it started off rough. I somehow, ended up getting a ride to work this morning and dropped my phone outside and destroyed it. So my phone was not turning on, and then it was turning on and didn't have a signal, and now it's won't stay on unless it's plugged in. So I don't know what's going on with it. So after this, I will be somewhere trying to get my phone fixed. So that is kind of just a bummer for today.
Wait a minute. I didn't interrogate this closely enough. You said you got a ride. You didn't say you took Lyft or Uber. You say you got a ride. I'm not gonna interrogate you online, but I feel like I need to check in about this.
Why did Regine did the same thing?
You got a ride.
A ride.
Any hooser.
So the People's Forum class actually went really well. I didn't ask. I have no idea how many people were actually online live, and I'm glad not to know. I do know that I was told, like, just beforehand, that not for my class, but for the class overall, I think something like 1,000 people had registered for the course. And I will say, like, both Sharice and I teach all the time. We've been in big, but like just the thought of 1,000 people at once just felt like a lot to me. And so I'm glad that there were not that many people in the room, but it was a good experience. Met some comrades from the AAPRP in New York chapter, so that was nice. We ended up having our Pan-African Women's Day program that following Sunday, the AAPRPGC. That actually went really well. We had, I think we had a pretty good like roundtable discussion about people's, intellectual and or sort of like material relationships and understandings to feminism as a term, and then to the ways that people understand the particularities of like women's experiences in organizing and revolutionary struggle. And we had, folks, representatives from the Palestinian Youth Movement, from IT, from Cameroon, from Venezuela, from Cuba, different places around the U.S. So that ended up being a good program as well. I have unofficially gotten word that my third year review went well. I don't know what that means right now. because if folks oh yeah. Oh Lord. Okay. So if folks know anything about the kind of tenure process prior to this moment, like sometimes you get resistance at the department level, but generally, like the department level, you tend to have decent support. And it is when it gets up into the dean's office and then the board of trustees where other kinds of things can potentially happen. So at least at the department level, I have support for keeping my job, but who knows what that means going forward. I think did I share with you, Sharice, that we had now have been told that we can't use university money to travel to any of the
Yeah, you said that to me.
and the restricted countries are basically almost all of the countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean.
Like I
So,
said, what the fuck did Kyrgyzstan do? Like, and then the
oh,
little McDonald's or something, some random island. It's like
yeah,
y'all
oh
just
yeah, I
hating at
did
this
see the
point.
McDonald Islands. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I can't, but do you remember if Kenya was on that list? Because I remember almost every other African country was. But I was talking to somebody today, and it'd be interesting if Kenya was not on that list. But anyway, let's see what else. As Sharice said, the semester is almost over. I'm very much looking forward to that. And my last kind of thing is that my first PhD student at Northeastern defended her dissertation on Monday, and she is officially done. She actually did a project on Black Staten Islanders, which is interesting because initially when she started off the project, she was interested in Black girlhood studies, and she ended up having an experience where she actually had a lot of Black men who were interested and willing to talk to her, and ended up having to wrestle with some of her own ideas about Black feminism, and having to incorporate more thinking about Black masculinity in the project, which was a task she welcomed and she felt good about. So she did a really good job. It was like a multimodal dissertation, so I'm excited to have been a part of ushering my first student through that process here at Northeastern. She's not my first student to finish a PhD, but she's my first student that I've worked with since I've been at Northeastern, and so that's my check-in.
Yeah, shout out to her. So what is it was somebody in here. Oh, Lisa, what does this mean? Can you pick me up at YMS? What's YMS? Maybe that was a mistake.
Maybe
Maybe
that
we
was yeah, I was
sent
gonna say maybe that was
somebody.
supposed to go to somebody else. Oh, I was also going to say when I was in New York, one of my former students from Northeastern came to my talk at the People's Forum, and I ended up going out to dinner with her afterwards, and that was really nice. It's always nice when you see folks in a setting that you're not accustomed to, and that she wanted to be there and sit in on other classes.
Mhm.
So that was nice.
Yeah. All right. So comments.
All right.
So Miss Nicole says at 2:13. Were we really at 2 hours and 13 minutes, or is that 2 minutes? God damn, that was a long episode. Holistic exhaustion is the plausible cause.
Yeah, I think that was we did. We finished the show kind of early-ish, but then we kept talking for a while
Oh
afterwards.
God. Oh yeah, I remember that.
And I remember we were talking about just generally it was because we were talking about our tiredness. We were also talking about the way people were responding to stuff now too. Um,
Right, right, right.
Particularly this being Trump's second cycle and how people like just seem to be acquiescing to things.
Oh my God.
Scientifico said the only reason to be on your knees is either to shoot or pray. I'm holding on to that one.
Yeah, boy. All right. So Mark Omanyoko, oh God, Mark Omanyoko. I don't know. Sorry, buddy. It said, okay, if Pan Africanism needs to be adjusted, augmented, or prefixed by revolutionary, the suggestion is wherever one finds the non adjusted, non augmented, and non prefixed use of Pan Africanism, it is likely to not be revolutionary. In which case, I see Andrew's point, to Hende's point, to the extent it was explained that the same concept under different verbiage to convey the authentic reality and necessity of socialist African revolution might be necessary to avoid confusion. In the same way, emancipatory journalism suggests journalism is not natively emancipatory, and liberation theology suggests theology is not natively liberative, revolutionary Pan-Africanism suggests Pan-Africanism is not natively revolutionary. Of course, in our own circles where revolutionary ideas are accepted as baseline, you can remove the modifier and use Pan-Africanism as shorthand for revolutionary Pan-Africanism, but that doesn't alter what the concept has come to mean for those outside the circle, which is largely performative Black nationalism and liberal at best or conservative at worst politics wearing Agbada or Katinji.
Okay. And so, amazing show.
Okay, so we got an email. And the email says, I was watching a podcast on women engaging in the struggle against colonialism in Ireland. A lot of these women recognized gendered oppression, but did not consider themselves feminist. I know the same phenomenon existed with a lot of Black revolutionaries in the RNA, BLA, and even CPUSA. To my knowledge, Claudia Jones, Queen Mother Moore, Sophia Bakari, Betty Shabazz, and others did not consider themselves feminist. How do you all explain this phenomenon? Why don't a lot of women struggling for national liberation consider themselves feminist? Why are so many Black women feminists now? There are a few feminists I really like. They are all also materialists. But most feminists I meet in organizational spaces, dating life, and just online are just angry liberals/Democrats who don't see African men and women's plight as intertwined. Curry put out a lecture last year about feminism as counterinsurgency. I think feminism in its most modern and common iterations are counterinsurgent. In the words of Dr. CBS, I am not a troglodyte on gender. I think it's absolutely necessary to understand the oppression of our sisters to get us free. Also, for context, I'm a straight Black man, damn near middle age. Anyways, I love y'all's analysis. Peace and thanks for reading my email. So, just to the point of middle age, if you are like 35, you're middle age. Because if we think about the realities of life expectancy, especially for Black men, which I think is like 67, that's literally you're halfway through your life. So, I don't just say that about you, but I had this conversation with Erin Kamugisha had posted something on Facebook, and I'm like, people think 50 is midlife. Who actually lives to be 100? Like nobody. Well, people, but not a lot. Not if we look at our life expectancies, like mid age is like right now.
Yeah.
Anywho's, okay. There's many ways to answer this question, but what I will say is that people recognizing your gendered oppression in the context of national liberation probably means that you do not see gender as the primary antagonism. And I think that many people who identify as feminists, whether Black, white, whatever, do see gender as the primary antagonism. I also think that feminism just came to overdetermine manifold ways that people believe in women's liberation or gender parity. It just became like the most hegemonic way to describe that politic, even as that politic can be inculcated in Marxism, Pan-Africanism, internationalism, and any type of like liberatory, progressive, or radical politic. And so I don't think so. Some people didn't identify as feminists because it just wasn't the term du jour. Others just didn't identify, like Queen Mother Moore just didn't identify as feminist. She was sort of emphatic about that. With regard to feminism being counterinsurgent, I think any of these ideologies can become counterinsurgent when they're co-opted and then sort of resold to us by the state. I don't know. I mean, I'll let Layla just speak more about feminism. I'll reserve my judgment on that. But I do think that a lot more people probably identify as feminists now, especially like people in academia, because I do think it's a hegemonic discourse in especially like Black studies or in interdisciplines. There's also women's studies. And so it is their entry point into liberatory struggle. And we are often led to believe that like intersectional feminism is like the apotheosis of like radicalism because of race, class, gender. And we don't necessarily always interrogate that. So, yeah.
No, I mean, obviously I agree with everything you said. I think that my issue with the reason why I choose to identify as feminist is related also to like why I want Pan-Africanism to be a term that means something in particular on its own without all the modifiers. And also for me, it's about the importance of being able to name what I am, right? And so for me, feminism does that. So there are like obviously you can have a gendered analysis, you can utilize triple oppression as a way of understanding the way that black poor women are walking through the world and having particular kinds of experiences, and or you can use something like the woman question in the sort of Marxist tradition to think about the role of women. And again, all of those are particular kind of analytic tools, and for me there's something that like to say that I am a feminist is different than saying like I have a gendered analysis. But although to Sharice's point, I think gender is a place that it is a particular, it's important. So what I say, it's important in the way that I understand and articulate my politics, but it's not the primary place where my politics sort of emanates from. So as a Pan-Africanist, obviously the questions of sort of nation, of land, of race in a particular kind of way are central to that. But what I also do understand is that there are many, I guess similar, and I guess this is similar to the critique of sort of meeting the modifier of revolutionary Pan-Africanism. There are many who identify as Pan-Africanists who don't take up a gendered analysis or a gender critique in a particular kind of way. Like that speech that I shared of my mother from the 1999 African Liberation Day, she literally talks about how the All African Women's Revolutionary Union is using triple oppression as a tool for theorizing their experience as women. There's a reason why even in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, there was a decision to form an All African Women's Revolutionary Union, which they decided to form inside of the party as opposed to as a separate organization. And again, there's a particular political genealogy and trajectory of that as well, because they didn't want to separate from the organization, but they recognized that there were particular ways as women that their labor was being kind of exploited.
And undervalued.
Yes, undervalued, that they were being overtaxed and overburdened with issues like childcare and reproductive labor inside of the organization. Like when it came time to like feed people and do like caregiving tasks. But for them, even as they created the All African Women's Revolutionary Union, many of those women actually did not identify as feminists either. My mother didn't identify as a feminist. And so I think that I do know that I did come to feminism through academia, through like I always had a sense of how I was experiencing things differently as a woman, but I didn't have a name or a word for it until I started taking women's studies classes in graduate school, like in graduate school in particular, not even undergrad. And so feminism holds that for me. But I also don't feel like, I feel like because of the particular way I came to feminism through particular kinds of Black women, like I don't negate what other people say about, the hegemonic sort of positionality of feminism, particularly in the academy, the white bourgeois nature of it, its initial sort of association with the suffragette movement. And we already know how we both feel about sort of voting rights, particularly in this country. So none of those things are central to my feminist politics. And so the way that I was introduced to feminism as a Black woman, like Black feminism, even though I use the term Pan-African feminism now, was that it was something fundamentally concerned about Black communities. I will say this is not holistically true, but some of my experiences with womanism took up cultural nationalist tropes in ways that felt inauthentic to me, which is why womanism never really resonated with me. In the same kind of, like, I'm not antagonistic to womanism. I just didn't take up womanism and say, okay, I'm a womanist as opposed to a feminist. But again, like I completely understand people's critiques of the way feminism operates and the way feminists, people who claim to be feminists, operate. But that has not overdetermined my relationship to feminism at this point.
So there's a few things to respond. So I will say, like when I was an undergrad, womanism did speak to me, especially the idea. So I should say, I was what would probably be classified as a hotep at one point. I came to consciousness through Afrocentrism, and I still am probably like a hotep Marxist. Like I am still a revolutionary nationalist. Like race is my, I'm a race woman, right? my locus of enunciation is the Black
Mhm.
world, but I liked the idea of complementarity. That really spoke to me in the ways that the critique of feminism that womanism offered, the critique of Black feminism in particular that Africana womanism offered, I found to be useful. It's not something that I don't identify as a womanist now, but I will say that it spoke to me. Clenora Hudson Weems' book, I walked
Mhm.
around with that book. But I will say I also was I cultural nationalism also spoke to me in a particular way, not necessarily like walking 10 steps behind your man, but I went through my white purge. I went natural at that time, like all that stuff. It was important to like me come into consciousness. And so that's my perspective on womanism.
Mhm.
So Joshua, so there are folks who don't know the term socialism, but hold the core principles and then come to know the word after. I feel this happens often with feminism. Feminism, and I don't think that you're making a one-to-one with feminism and socialism, but socialism is an economic system. And so I feel like being a socialist has a particular type of materiality that objectively that feminism doesn't.
Mhm.
I'm not I just want to make that distinction, but perhaps, right? But I also want to be clear that there are principles that people might hold that others might identify as feminists, but people who hold those principles don't identify as feminists, right? And I don't, and again, I just don't want um shut up, Mark. I just don't want I want us to be expansive in our understanding that struggles for gender and women's liberation aren't reducible to feminism. Just like, quite frankly, I think that all struggles for economic liberation are not necessarily communist or
Mhm.
socialist,
Mhm.
right? I think to me, it's akin to sort of the distinction that, and Pan-Africanists get a pushback on this, but the distinction between like Marxism and scientific socialism, we
Mhm.
often reduce them to each other, but some would argue like there's Cabralism, there's Nkrumah Touréism
Mhm.
alongside Marxism that are all species of
Mhm.
scientific socialism.
Mhm.
So yeah, but I would say like, I'm less and less I will say, right, I'm critical of feminism, but I will also admit that there's many people that I respect and admire and whose work is useful to me who do identify as feminist proper,
Mhm.
right? And then there are those who I don't, like Claudia Jones, who care about women's liberation but do not identify as feminists. And so um I don't think feminist, not feminist is the primary contradiction either. So we need
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
keep that top of mind.
Well, this is just something else. I know we started to talk about this when we were talking about Dean Spade's book, and you mentioned like how you don't like stories. But one of the things that I appreciate about stories is that I actually do think it matters how people come to things. And when I say it matters how people come to things, it's because I think there is information there about why people attach and or disassociate from certain things, right? So like I personally never went through a hotep phase because I feel like because I was raised as a Pan-Africanist, and so like that's why I didn't latch on to womanism in a particular kind of way where I see a lot of other folks who, again, that I appreciate, respect, and admire, saying, okay, well, womanism is the particular kind of articulation of a gendered analysis,
Mm-hmm.
of an affirmative gender analysis that they take up. And so like my struggle with womanism has always been that particular crux of it, right? Like that particular kind of cultural nationalist leaning of it. And I guess I don't have a clearer explanation as to why the white bourgeois feminist articulation of feminism doesn't also do that for feminism for me. And I think maybe because as I learned about it, I already learned about it being sort of oppositional to that particular kind of stance. And so like I never took that on. And so I don't know, like, again, this is not, like you said, this is not about the being feminist or not being feminist as a particular kind of litmus test in terms of like you claiming that as an identity. But, a person that doesn't, want to engage the reality of what it means that women do and Black women and poor women and poor Black women in particular do experience, inhabit, the world in a particular kind of way. And that matters, and that we need to think about what that means if it is that we are struggling for freedom and liberation, and how do we adjust for and account for those particular kinds of reality and not repeat those same kinds of contradictions in our own kinds of struggles.
Yeah, so Josh said, not a one-to-one, but gender depression for social reproduction is a precondition of capitalism, though no. So an ideology will dialectically emerge to oppose that. So I don't know that feminism emerged dialectically from this idea, from what you just named. Marxist feminism did, but suffragette feminism was not a critique of capitalism, nor was it a critique of social reproduction. It was a critique of being marginalized in the project of white supremacy. So again, it's that modifier question. So so feminism is not objectively anti-capitalism. It can be, right? Just like, yeah, so it can be, but the formulation that you presented, I think, is correct, right? But that is not what if you talk to many feminists, I don't know that will be why they identify as such, nor would that be their analysis. Understanding women are humans, yeah, and we need to destroy capitalism. So you're imputing an anti-capitalist analysis into feminism that is not objectively or necessarily there. Even if you look at intersectional feminism, and people can hate me if they want, but the class and race, class, gender is often under theorized. When you're arguing out a particular position before the law, class is not a protected category. So you are objectively not anti-capitalist if that is what your framework is. And so again, I'm not, this is taking a lot longer than it should. And I don't think we need to necessarily beat a dead horse, but I hear you. Women should be liberated. All genders should be liberated. I think even men should be liberated from patriarchy.
Absolutely, 100%. And also, I just think that one other sort of element or component of this is that a lot of people, when they raise questions about whether or not there needs to be a particular kind of gendered analysis, are thinking about the experiences of women in the U.S. in particular. And while I still think that there are gendered biases against women even in the U.S., I'm also thinking about this as a particular kind of reality for women across the world. And so
absolutely.
And so in our Pan-African Women's Day commemoration this past weekend, one of the speakers from Cameroon was specifically raising issues of like child marriages, still barriers to children's education because of particular beliefs about the utility of girls. One of the women from the Palestinian youth movement was sharing that one of the ways that a lot of not so much in the US, but that these traditional sort of ideas about women and femininity, one of the ways that women get kind of caught up in things is like when they are in these kind of women's spaces, there will be certain women that will target them for like a lack of modesty, which then goes to the community, and then this becomes a way of targeting these women, and then because they are ostracized and made vulnerable, then they become targets for Israeli forces to be taken up and used as, to sort of defend Israeli interests. The same thing happens with sort of pink washing in terms of like gender and sexuality. So because there are these still kind of, archaic ideas about homosexual people being somehow, whatever, not worthy of being or existing, then Israeli forces will take, when they find out that a person is secretly or closetedly homosexual, then they will take pictures and then utilize those things to turn spies for the sake of the Israeli government. And so again, having a particular analysis of the way that women are being targeted, the way that lesbian, gay, transgender folks are being targeted is really essential to our understandings of liberation, because we don't even realize how our own people are being turned against us, because we are making them more vulnerable even inside of our communities because of these problematic ways of being and thinking that we have about what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a gay, what it means to be a lesbian, what it means to be trans, all these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think so. The international question is absolutely important. And even generally speaking, when I talk about like my critique of feminism, like if I was in the Caribbean, I would absolutely be a feminist because there are West Indian feminists like NDIA, Red Thread. There are certain organizations that I think, and they're the social and material reality is different. The way that the experience of patriarchy, right, that is very entwined with colonialism and in being in a majority Black or a majority African society, I think is important. And so, yeah, I agree. All of what you said is really, really important. But I think ultimately, um, being clear
Yeah,
about what we mean is very important. And at the bottom of everything, it's like, what the fuck are those politics looking like?
yeah.
I don't care. You could call yourself Wop Babaloo Bob. What are those politics looking like? Because you can identify or disidentify with any label, but it's like, what are you doing? And how are you oriented ethically? What are your
Mhm.
principles? And how are you engaging in struggle? I think that ultimately that's what's important. Yeah. So
Yeah. All
cool,
right.
guys. That was a great email. Um, so basically what we wanted to talk, the last thing I wanted to raise, Rouse said, I'd be interested in hearing this conversation with y'all and Dr. Jamie Swift. Absolutely not. Um, I don't like the way that they handled this Barbara Smith. So I wrote something for Bar
Mhm.
responding to an article. I forgot the person's name. That they wrote about like Barbara Smith and June Jordan. Black women radicals, primarily Jamie Smith, did this interview that I felt like um was I did not like the way that they approached that, and nor did so I won't be having that conversation until that is addressed, or if it's addressed. Any hooser. So run tell that. So yes, okay. So basically, so our study section, I don't even know what to call it, but we're just basically thinking about this sort of section came up because I was like, maybe we should talk about imagination. And Layla was like, you hate imagination. And I'm like, I am critical of imagination without material action. But basically it's like, how are we contending with this moment? Like, what are we reading? What are we thinking about? Like, what are we addressing in this moment to contend with this conjuncture? Not that this conjuncture is singular, right? There is a velocity and intensity to it. It's not singular, but it's sort of like, how do we face this moment? I don't know, Layla, how would you characterize it?
Yeah, I mean, I even just in looking at the Google sheet and looking at the things that you have in there versus what I have in there, because like I know you've said this, like you don't really read a whole lot of like fiction or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
I do find like fictional stories. I like, I've said this before, I like sort of apocalyptic genres of thinking. I like the kind of futurist stuff, and I think that for me, it's a kind of escapism. It's not escapism in that like I just want to not be a part of the world. What I find useful in it is that I don't find myself to be a particularly creative thinker, and so I
Mm.
feel like there is something in people's ability to create stories and to like envision particular kinds of world that I find useful in that. And so like when I'm trying to write or when I'm trying to do other work, I'm trying to channel a particular kind of creative spirit because I
Mm-hmm.
feel in my daily lives very tied to like like material realities, right?
Yeah.
And I actually, contrary to that, I actually think you're quite creative. Like I think you always have like a lot of ideas. And for me, like I feel like that is a place where I kind of struggle. It's like, okay, like I'm a person like I'll show up, I'll do stuff like what, but I'm not like we could do it this way. Like, and so that I think is why for me, like reading things, watching things helps maintain, a sense of myself, and also helps
Mm-hmm.
maintain like I think levity is really important. I think that
Mm-hmm.
as Black people, and I think it's something we do really well as Black people. Like, and I don't, we make jokes out of everything, and sometimes we
Mm-hmm.
we often laugh at our pain. We
Mm-hmm.
we make inappropriate jokes, we, you know, hurt each other's feelings and all those kinds of things. But I also do think that there is something about not in the kind of like very neoliberal, like uh what do you call it? Like capitalistic sense of like resilience. But I do think there's something in like being able to find levity and fun
Mm-hmm.
that's really important to sort of maintaining human spirit. And so like in thinking about these things, like how do we maintain spirit?
Well, because if you think about it, oppression is deeply unserious. It is deadly serious, but it's deeply unserious. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? This what we doing? Nigga, we got credit scores. We have
Yeah.
to work our lives away. Like somebody wants to steal all of the world's resources, like on some supervillain shit. Like it's actually deeply unserious. There's
Yeah.
so much of it that's like, bruh. But it's deadly. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And it has like real stakes. And so I agree. I think see, my only thing with fiction, I just feel like I don't have time. And what
Mm-hmm.
I'm it just feels like I have to know like everything. But to your point, there's so much knowledge that's in fiction. I get that. The exception that I have made is that I will listen to fiction on Audible, but
So,
I won't read
that's
it.
how I read it. That's how
Yeah.
I like. I haven't spent a lot of time in fictional text, although I think I've mentioned this on the show before. This is actually a fictional text, but I really like it. It's Against the Loveless World. It's
Mhm.
Palestinian. It's about Palestine too, and it's about like the sort of Palestinian resistance movement. And so the other thing about fiction is that, you know, as an anthropologist, right? So I'm interviewing folks and I'm learning about like things that they're doing strategically, organizationally. And sometimes I ask myself, like, is this something that I actually want to write about? Particularly when people are like in the midst of struggle, do we want to like give all these details and give all the particularities of what it is that people are doing when they're in the midst of struggle? Whereas I think fiction allows people to take bits and pieces of things that they know without necessarily like revealing entire plots and plans. And that's one thing about this book. So like
Mhm.
the the main character, like you see like different iterations of her life over time, but a lot of what she talks about is like falling in love with this man while they're like fighting like underground Palestinian struggles, right? And so she's talking about like the caves that are being dug and like where they're keeping guns. And so like we know these things in kind of like a general sense, and there's ways to like give people access to these stories of resistance, which are probably
Mhm.
rooted in realities, but are not necessarily like giving all of these particular kinds of details away.
Yeah. So, Layla, Mag, you wanted to know, have you read The Deep Rivers by Solomon?
I have not. I have not.
So, and what Eric, this is a what I will say, like fiction is really important to Black feminists, I think, because if you think about historical work, Black women didn't necessarily write nonfiction monographs, or for a number of reasons, right? A number
Mm,
of barriers, but where they are canonical or in the canon is generally through fiction. And so I could see why there's a deep sort of entwinement, especially in Black studies, of like feminism and literature. A lot of them were
mm,
in literature, like Barbara Christian, blah blah blah. And so all that to say, and I do agree, right? Like I really like James Baldwin's fiction,
mm.
actually. I like his essays too, but like I really like I like fiction that's like I don't like fantastical shit, but I like, what is it called, historical fiction, I guess. That's the
Yeah,
stuff that really resonates with me.
yeah. And like because so like somebody like Octavia Butler, right? Like
Mhm.
she is a sci-fi writer. And then
Mhm.
somebody like Tananarive Due. Like they and so like Tananarive Due was like more into Black horror, but they both are deeply like entwined in sort of particular kinds of historical fiction. Like all of Tananarive Due's stuff is very site specific, and so she's like writing about Black folks in the Pacific Northwest.
Mhm.
And then like the way that she does horror, like she's taking up particular tropes in our experiences as Black people in the way that like this is why Tananarive Due and Jordan Peele had that like connection for a while, because their take on horror is it's not like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Their take
Mhm.
on horror is, you know, the like one of her books, Joplin's Ghost, which is about Scott Joplin. It's like a house that's haunted by Scott Joplin's ghost. And like
Mm.
it's like a piano that's playing Scott Joplin's music, right? Or like her husband Stephen Barnes has a book like African Blood Brotherhood, right? And
Mhm.
so like there are ways that they're all taking up these things. Like Octavia Butler is thinking about like she takes on, like, she kind of does it through speciesism, but she's taking up issues of racism and these through like species, and so she's able to do that through science fiction by talking about aliens, but or vampires. But like, if folks have read what's the one about the vampires? God, I can't remember
I know
right
what you're talking. With like, yeah, I know. No, why can't I remember the damn name? That's
I have to
crazy.
see the cover of the book. But that particular book, right? Like, she's talking about the fact that, so we like the history of vampires as we know is like these Romanian European vampires who can't go out in the sun.
Twilight.
Nah, not Octavia, but it
Oh,
ain't Twilight.
oh,
Um,
I thought you were talking about that's.
it's
I thought you were talking about a
fledgling,
dominant
fledgling,
trope.
fledgling.
Okay.
Fledgling is the name of the book. But yes, these dominant tropes, right? But the story in Fledgling is that these old vampires are coming after this young new vampire because she's a black vampire. Why does this fucking black vampire exist? Because these vampires have been experimenting and have determined that mixing with black people gives these vampires melanin, which lets them daywalk. So black people are somehow more suited biologically to like handle the sun, but like they're all fighting against this mixing of these old historic vampires with black people because it's an abomination of the species. And so there's all these sort of meditations on like racial mixing through this particular kind of sci-fi type story, right? So this is why I find all this stuff kind of useful.
I don't like Du Bois's fiction. I do like. I will say my favorite Du Bois fiction book is Quest for the Silver Fleece, and that is probably because it was based on his very extensive report he did on like cotton country that the U.S. Department of Labor destroyed. So he had no copy of it, and so what he did with that sort of knowledge that he collected, that he was able to remember, as he wrote that book. But Du Bois's fiction is not very good. In my perspective. But yeah, so Camille talk about I also struggle with fiction, but I do find that when I read it, it allows me a safe space to process the news, nonfiction things happen in the real world. I don't like reprieve. I just want to raw dog it. I just want a main line oppression. It keeps me active.
Oh man. Okay, so to that end, Sharice came up. We were, Sharice likes the list, and so she came up with a
I
list of things
do.
that we could come up with. So, what we decided to do is talk about something we've read, like we've already read, something we plan to read, something we're inspired by. Something we've listened to or watched, something we are inspired by, and then because we have both been engaging with different works of this author Dean Spade, we decided to like kind of close out with like a Dean Spade hour. So I had read, although I think Sharice also finished it, but I had read Love in a Fucked Up World by Dean Spade, and then Sharice read a book called Mutual Aid by Dean Spade. So we're gonna talk about those later on, but we will start with the something we've read recently. So
not to end with the whites, but
well, we're not gonna end there. We got other stuff.
We got other stuff. That's true.
So this is an interesting one because the book I read recently, or I listened to, is called Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor. Nnedi Okorafor is a Nigerian American African futurist writer. She very much rejects the term Afrofuturist. She really wants to be clear about the fact that she is an African futurist. She's writing about the African continent, not like this sort of kind of way. One of the first books of hers that I came to that I really liked was a book called Who Fears Death, which is like a post-apocalyptic kind of Nigerian setting that I really enjoyed. Now, Death of the Author is interesting. So Death of the Author is, what I like about it is that, well, actually, I really enjoyed the book. I did not like the ending, but I like the book otherwise. So in the book, it deals with several different things. So in the book, it's a book within a book. So the main character is, and this is, I also think it's like loosely autobiographic. So the main character is a Nigerian woman. She's like got her, her family is also in the book. She's disabled. So she has an accident when she's a child and she can no longer walk. Because of this, she has really developed like, what do you call it? Like very like superior upper body strength, whatever. This comes in later. Important. She's a writer. So she's trying to get her book. She's not like, she is the black sheep of her family. So like her other family members are like engineers, doctors, lawyers, and she's a struggling writer trying to write in the vein of a Toni Morrison or, you know, whoever else. She ain't getting her stuff done. In fact, one of the early scenes in the book is she ends up cussing out her students because she's like teaching adjunctly at a university. She cusses out her students because of their writing. She loses her job. Losing her job like kind of sends her into a spiral, and then she writes this like in a like a rage over the course of like a couple of nights, writes this book called Rusted Robots. And it's like it's nothing like anything she's written up to this point, because everything she's written up to this point is like more like in the vein of like a Toni Morrison or whatever. None of those books have been picked up in the book. So obviously the title of the book is Death of the Author, so we know from the beginning that the author dies. We don't know how, we don't know what like her whole story is, all these things. But also but also her disabledness comes into play too. So she writes this book. There are bits and pieces of the actual book, Rusted Robots, that she writes that are in the book, which is, how do I even explain that book? That is also like a post-apocalyptic Nigeria. Like there are like humes, which are like takes on like robotic takes on humans, but are not. And then there's like these other kind of spirit things. There's like this one last human left on Earth that ends up dying. But anyway, the moral of that story is that there is this moment of climax where all these things are kind of coming to an end in the Rusted Robots books, and what ends up saving humanity, it's not even humanity, what ends up saving the world at that point is stories. And the robots, only because of their experience having been with humans up until they died, they are able to create, like they've not been able to create stories, but they've been able to catalog them. But in a moment, they're able to create a story, which they then send off, which to this entity that's about to destroy the earth, that stops them from destroying the earth. And so she's like making an argument about the importance of stories and storytelling. But it's also really interesting because like the book also allowed like different chapters take the perspective of different members of her family on like, you know, her dying. I don't want to give like everything away. I found the book really good. I just was disappointed in the way that it ended. Now, what I then found, like, the issue with following authors that are alive, right? So I also follow her on social media. And I probably should not, because now, like, you know, apparently she is a Tesla driver, and she was ranting about, you know, folks who are like wanting to destroy Teslas in this moment. And I'm just like, girl, shut up. Like, this is completely tone deaf. And so there are also ways in the that I think the main character is like kind of self-centered in the text that I find in her as a person through her social media character. But I found the book really interesting. I was talking to Dartrisha about it, and she also read it too, and she also did not like the ending either. But the ending was just the ending felt like she was writing the book, and then she didn't know what to do in the end, and so it was just like. But yeah, but I would be interested in other people reading the book and seeing how they feel about it. But I really appreciated, one, because I was reading that as I was trying to finish my book manuscript. And so just like her struggles with her own personal ideas about herself as a writer, what type of writing she should or be able to do, and then like her pivoting just resonated with me as I was trying to finish that book proposal in that moment. And so like there's other things, right? Like that's also a thing that I find useful in fiction. Sometimes it's not about like the capital letter kind of things, but it was just like, okay, yeah, you've been writing, trying to write your whole life. You think you're a writer, but nobody likes your shit. But then you decided to like go a whole different route, and then all of a sudden, it's like that book like takes off, like. And they end up like optioning it for a movie, but then when they option it for a movie, they turn it into some American ass bullshit. Like all the characters like are no longer like Nigerian. So like there are all these interesting, I think, different kind of tropes. But I found it really helpful in getting through those couple of weeks when I was trying to finish that book proposal.
That's funny. Yeah, when you talk about rage writing, I was like, that's familiar. I don't
Yeah.
think anybody's privileging white men's history or nonfiction as a source of truth. It's just nonfiction facts, generally speaking. Depends on what nonfiction you write. So, um, like, anyway, That book, all my friends are really interesting, and I feel like most of my friends read like fiction and science fiction, like because I remember you and Takia, like you and Dartricia, and I'm just like, well, read this Cabral, I guess.
But
Like
you know,
it's
I
so
also got that from my mother because my
yeah,
mother had that Sister Chat book club, and it's like one of the earliest fiction books I remember reading as a child, like outside of like the Babysitters Club and that kind of shit, was
yeah.
Octavia Butler. Like my mother, her book club was reading The Parable of the Sower, and Kindred. Like I have a signed copy of Kindred by Octavia Butler because of my mom's book club. So.
My mom had a whole bunch of fiction books on the shelf. The first book I remember is Black Unicorn. I think that's a collection of Audre Lorde's fiction. It's the first book I just remember. I don't know why. So she had a bunch of fiction, and when I was younger, I read a lot of Terry McMillan. I was like 12, which I probably should have been doing, but it's what my mom had. So I read.
Yeah. And Sister Soldier.
Oh, girl, yes, absolutely, yeah. So, okay, so something I've read, is actually interestingly related to what we've been talking about: shadow boxing by Joy James. But it's this particular chapter, and I teach 2 units on Black feminism in my Black social and political thought course. One is liberal and progressive feminism. One is radical and revolutionary feminism. And so we read the chapter Radicalizing Feminisms from the Movement Era. And I liked this chapter a lot because of the ways that it really broke down. Yes, we was reading Eric Jerome Dickey, absolutely.
yes.
But I liked this chapter. I liked the chapter because of how he distinguished between not just liberal and radical, but between liberal, neo-radical, radical, and revolutionary feminisms, Black feminism. And I found that particularly illuminating and interesting because especially the neo-radical piece, right? Because neo-radicalism is basically like a co-opted radicalism, and is adjacent to in her typology, and is like adjacent to liberalism. And I also appreciated how for her the difference between radical and revolutionary is basically action and challenging state violence. And so I really appreciated that chapter. And again, thinking about different iterations of these ideologies that claim or that sort of are extant in our organizations, and how do we make sense of them? And like y'all know, I'm all about precision and clarity, and so I really appreciate readings that gesture toward that. But that was just one chapter in this book. The book that I keep on returning to, ironically, is this book, Freedom Dreams. I also teach aspects of this, but I really love this book. And there's actually, I think, like a 20th anniversary one that came out a couple years ago, and Aja Monet wrote the introduction. But this book is actually really good. There's something for everybody in it because the chapters are like thematic. Don't look at me like that, Layla.
No, the only reason why I'm saying this is because my mentor, Baina Muhammad, she's been on the show. When we were in undergrad, she had us read Freedom Dreams, and I did not appreciate it as undergrad. And she always was like, "What is wrong with you? Like, why don't you like?" And then I read it later on in graduate school, and I was like, "I love this." And she's like, "See, I don't know what your problem was in undergrad." And like, so I've had an interesting relationship to Freedom Dreams like over the years, and I just think that as undergrad, I just think I wasn't like reading it closely. I don't know what it was, or maybe it was the way people were talking about it. But the dream thing was getting on my nerves.
yeah, and I think I really like how he interrogates like contradiction within each of these like movements. And just like Robin Kelly's mastery of knowledge is actually like just really mind-boggling. But I really, really like this text. I don't like, and the thing is, what I have to do is stop disliking books and writers because other people make them raggedy. When I revisit things for myself, it's like, oh, it's not this person, it's the way that people misunderstand or don't read at all and just claim things in the name of a thing. But this text I think is really, really important. And I've actually used parts of the introduction in various speeches that I've given, but like because for him the freedom dreams are very material. Right. He's not like, oh, these people are just pie. No, they're very material. What he's saying is that you have to envision a world, but then you have to work for it. Like that is what makes it a freedom dream. Otherwise, it's just a pipe dream.
Yeah.
So that is my book. Of course, my favorite chapter in the whole world or in this whole book is The Negro Question, Red Dreams of Black Liberation. Duh.
Mm,
But I also like Roaring from the East, Third World Dreaming. Those are like the two that I like revisit often. But I think that this is a book, there should really be like a study group on this book.
mm,
Um that is critical, that takes it up, like takes the idea seriously, but it's also like critical, like, you know. So yeah, so that was my book or my books. So the next one is something we plan to read. And so I'm going to lift up a couple things, but the book that I plan to read or that I'm about to so this is a random thing, but by the time I turn 38, which is on May 16th, I want to read 37 introductions. And I want to read 37 introductions of books because I just want to read 37 introductions of books. But so this book, Global
do you know that I
Marxism.
have this? I have that.
Twinning. So okay, so another book club book. So the Bluine autobiography, but then this one, but Global Marxism, Decolonization and Revolutionary Politics. This just is really intriguing to me. I've heard kind of mixed messages about it. I don't know like how rigorous it is, but I just really appreciate the different ways that like the global south is considered to be a site of like Marxist theory and praxis, and ways that y'all know our white friends on the left like act like all of that shit is whatever. None of it matters. It's revisionism. But so there's two more books that I'm just gonna mention briefly that I actually plan to read because of not leisure. So this book is The Black Utopians. It's Searching for Paradise in the Promised Land in America. I'm reading this book because for some reason this author requested to be in conversation with me when they come to the Detroit Public Library, which is so fucking random. Number one, they're from Detroit. So certainly there are people here in Detroit that they could have talked to. But anyway, they asked me to do it. So I'm going to read this book. That event is on like April 14th or something like that. So I'm going to read this book. And by read, I mean listen to it on Audible and then find key quotes in the hard copy. But then also, so I'm writing a book on We Charge Genocide as Mutual Comradeship. And so I want to read this book by Bill Mullen, who, spoiler alert, or I guess fun fact, was my developmental editor for Black Scare, Red Scare. He wrote this book, We Charge Genocide, American Fascism and the Rule of Law. So I want to read this as sort of background reading for a book. So I'm not reading it for leisure. I'm reading it for like secondary readings for that book. But those move to the top of my list.
All right. Well, that was one of my ones that I want to read. So I'm not going to talk about that. But so when I did the People's Forum, they compensated me in some books, and one of them that they gave me that I wasn't even aware of is this little pamphlet, Niger, Another Coup or Pan-African Revolution. And so I was very excited. Obviously, y'all know I have this revolution workshop coming up next week, and so this is something that I plan on reading this weekend to think about, because like I think the theme for the revolution workshop is like revolution beyond the event. And so they're asking us to think about, like, one, how are people thinking about and theorizing revolution in general, but we often talk about like that sort of moment of revolutionary triumph, but then what does it look like to sustain revolution? Like what's the work of doing that? And as I think what's happening in the Sahel is an ongoing situation to watch. I'm really interested in this, obviously. So global Marxism was one of the others. And then, so I was going to mention this more, but I'm going to mention it a little bit later. But there's also this book, We Tried to Tell Y'all, Black Twitter and Digital Counter Narratives. So my classmate, former colleague, Meredith Clark, so we were in graduate school together. I'm going to say this, I'm going to talk about this more into something we're inspired by. But so Meredith is actually a journalist and is already tenured. And so she was talking. So we had a new Books in Black Feminism event last week on Northeastern's campus. So we had 3 authors come. Like I said, I'll talk about it later. But Meredith was one of the ones. And she was telling the audience that, like, she never had any intentions of writing a book. Like, writing a book is not a requirement for tenure in the field of journalism. But she was the first person to write a dissertation on Twitter, on Black Twitter. And so there had been, but she was telling us that she had been told, even when she was in graduate school and even later on, that it wasn't a subject worth thinking about or writing about. And her writing about Black Twitter is not just like writing about the phenomenon of Black Twitter, but like writing about like what are the sort of narratives and counter narratives and types of conversations that are happening on Black Twitter, which is different from sort of other public conversations. So this is a book that I'm also interested to dig into. And also because I think she has a similar relationship to, I think, writing a book that I do. And so I'm always interested in folks who like have that same kind of tension with writing or resistance to writing a book and then do it. And so I'm interested in seeing what the final product was of that. All right.
So anyone have books in French? Read Le Dernier de la Terre.
Hey, look,
Rest of the earth. Any Fanon.
I was gonna say any Sekou Touré stuff is all his stuff, because a lot of his stuff has, it's not a lot. Some of his stuff has been translated into English, but none of them are particularly good translations in English. Like, and the thing is, I don't speak French, but I can just tell by the way that they've been translated that they're not great translations, because they're like the way they read in English is kind of clunky. But I think that maybe tapping into Burkina books, they're like the stuff that they're collecting for their library in Burkina Faso might, if you're looking for revolutionary text in French, might be another place to find some more things to read. But I'm not a French reader or speaker, so can't help with that much.
I do multitask while I use Audible. I work out. I usually listen to it when I'm working out or taking a shower.
So I don't listen when I'm working out. I'm a person that needs music when I work out. I need something to push me through. But I don't have a car right now, but my favorite place before to listen to Audible was driving. Like that's one thing. But I struggle with listening to academic or like intellectual text on Audible, because I need that tactile practice of like highlighting, writing to retain things. And so I mostly only listen to fiction. I have to read like intense books.
Right. Somebody else was sorry. Is Black Twitter really a thing, or is it just blacks on Twitter?
Well,
read the book.
I mean, I think Meredith would say Black Twitter was a thing, but I only really got on Twitter because of Charisse, honestly. Like, I was on it, but I don't even, like, I've never been a like particularly active on Twitter in general, and then it's whatever it is now. But I'm not a person that like tweets my thoughts. Like, I do things on Instagram because I like sharing pictures and things like that, but I don't generally tweet my thoughts. I follow them, but I've never been like a part of threads of long conversations and all that kind of stuff on Twitter.
Yeah, okay, so let me address this. So how can socialism be more inherently objective material than feminism if feminism is not reducible to its bourgeois tendencies? How is sex gender less material? I didn't say sex gender was less material than class. I will put it this way. Feminism is probably the parallel to feminism is Marxism, right? There are isms. Socialism is the sort of organizing of the economic system. So I don't know what the other part of that equation, if Marxism is the feminism, Marxism is to socialism what feminism is to what? Do you know what I'm saying? So Marxism is like a theory of achieving socialism as a positive economic system. What would be the positive? So they're overthrowing patriarchy, but what would be the sort of positive material system? So that's what I'm saying. I'm not discounting sex gender. That wasn't the point of what I'm saying. My point is objectively socialism is a material system. Feminism is like a set of like practices to the end of whatever the equivalent of socialism would be. I don't know if that makes sense, but y'all remember like when we took SATs and shit, we had the X is to X as Y is to anyway. That's what I'm talking about.
No,
no, feminism and Marxism are not parallels in terms of what they're parallels in terms of like isms, right? They are ways of structuring how we fight, I guess, right? Or how we critique what their ideologies, if you will. But my point, so the point is when I was talking to, I think I was talking to Dre or either Dre or Josh, I was saying that Marxism and feminism are not like the one to one.
Mm.
Um, any hooser. Okay, so you, Layla, now we're
Okay.
talking about
All right.
something
So
we've watched,
something
listened
we've
to.
watched or listened to. So where was I? I think when I was coming back from New York, on the plane, I started watching this movie called Exhibiting Forgiveness. Um, and I ended up finishing it later on when I got home because that it was a flight from New York to Boston, so it was not long enough to watch an actual movie. But let's see, I want to get the author, the painter's name. So Exhibiting Forgiveness is um, is a dramatic film. Andrew Day is the female lead in the movie. What is the guy's name? I had it pulled up. Um, Andre Holland. Andre Holland is the male lead, but it's loosely based on the life of. It's written and directed by an artist called Titus Kaffer. I think it's like Kaffer, who is from somewhere in the Midwest, and the story is a story of this black man who, like, as a kid, his father was drug addicted and abusive both to him and his mother. He's not in his life for a long time, and then as an adult, I don't. There's a background story that we don't really go in. For some reason, his mother is needing to move out of the house that she's in, and I think she's coming to stay with him. So he comes back to move his mother out of the home, and apparently his father has gotten clean at this point and wants to like reconnect. His mother has always, been open to the possibility of them reconnecting. In the beginning of the movie, you just kind of see, it's like you see him as like somebody who just refuses to sort of like engage with his absent father. But over the course of the movie, like, you see the nature of the trauma that like he experienced, which is partially his father's drug use, but it's more than about his father's drug use. It's actually really about his father's ideas about manhood and masculinity. Um, so like there's a scene where they basically like go and clean up trash for like extra money or whatever. And he's like 12 years old or something. And his father is just like working him and working him and working him. And in the process, they're like at a dump site and he ends up stepping on a rusty nail.
Oh,
And his father like won't even take him to the doctor, none of that. And partially because they don't got no money. But also because like they're out working really to essentially feed his dad's habit. And at this point, his dad is like a functional substance addicted person. Like he's, still living with his mom, but he clearly has his habit. But he basically like they spend the rest of the day like cutting grass and doing this other stuff. And he makes him push through this, having this nail stuck all the way through his foot.
oh
And so
my
like you
God.
also are seeing, but like in the story, he's also like Andrew Day is his wife. They have a small son, and you see him like navigating his own ideas about like who he's supposed to be as a man, as a father to a son, who is very much damaged by some of the things that he experienced with his father, but is very much trying not to relive that out on his son. But he is very gentle with his son, but like he has all these like nightmares, and he has like he's not able to sleep well, and he has all this sort of stress and trauma. Like I don't know how people feel about spoilers, but so I won't spoil things. But and he's an artist, so like he's a painter, and so one of the ways that he works through his trauma is by painting, and so he paints all these scenes of his childhood. Um, and like the film, there's something that like I tend to like about, I think, that's true of like a lot of African and or third world fiction, that is not obsessed with like neatly tied happy endings, that I feel like this particular film does. And so again, the title is Exhibiting Forgiveness. And so it's his process of trying to regenerate a relationship with his father. And he does that to a degree and extent, but it's not like a happy tied up ending where like him and his dad just like go off into the sunset and they're like arm in arm. But he does kind of come to a sense that like there is something about like reconciling with his dad in some kind of way that's important to him having a sense of himself as a man and who he's going to be as a father. And so like what I really appreciate the film in its attempts to think about like, the complexities of family life and navigating our own
Mm.
who we're supposed to be as men or even as women. Like, yes, he very much loves his mama and he's, very tied to her, but his mama made some messed up decisions too that also kind of put him in jeopardy as a child too. And so even that, like, he's trying to navigate his frustration with some of the decisions that his mom made, even though he still loves and protects her, very much. But I found it to be a really good and emotional and heart-wrenching film with both like taking up, I think, some of the things that are difficult about Black life, particularly for poor folks, but without, to me, making it like,
Drama porn.
yeah, like somehow it walks that line kind of finely, and I really enjoyed the film.
Hmm. Um, at first I thought that was you were saying that was a documentary, but it does say
Oh,
film.
it's a film.
Do you want to talk about this Eritrean women freedom
Oh,
fighters?
yes. So the other thing, so I've seen this film before, but I taught it recently in my which class? In my Intro to Africana Studies class. So there is a documentary online. It's about the Eritrean women freedom fighters. And so these are women who literally were like military combatants in Eritrean liberation struggles. What I find really interesting about this particular that is a documentary. So they're interviewing women
Mhm.
who have fought. There are some women who did end up having children, but many of the women, as a result of going to war, made the decision not to have children. They
Mm.
say to be there fully as comrades and as combatants in the struggle, like having it's called I'm gonna put I thought I had it open. I'm gonna drop a link in the chat when I at some point. I'll pull it up and I'll drop a link in the chat when I finish talking about it. But it's like Eritrean freedom fighters or something is the title of it. But the conversation that I found really interesting in it, and this is what I'm talking about in terms of like having a gendered analysis and needing to have an understanding
Mm.
of like what women experience. So these women are talking about how, yes, they are venerated for their role in having fought for Eritrean liberation, but because they do not have children, because they chose not to have children or could not have children, even in the aftermath of Eritrea gaining its independence, they are still seen as less than as women, because to be a woman is to have had a child. And
Mm.
I think in general, African societies value having children. So I think it's important for men. And I know that like historically it's important for men and women to have children. But I do think there is something qualitatively and materially different about childless men, the way childless men live in the world than childless women. And so many of them, and they say like they would have made the decision again. They would have still made a decision not to have children, to fight for Eritrean liberation and freedom. But like, it just makes me think, like, what does it mean that you could be venerated for literally fighting for the liberation of your entire country and then still be somehow seen as less than a woman because your decision to fight for that liberation meant that you either could not or chose not to have children. And like, and
Mm.
what kind of damage does that do, that saying that you're still somehow, like, even your struggle to fight for our liberation is somehow secondary to your responsibility to have children, like to and like and that to make you less than as a woman. And so that's like, then they're all kind of like meditating on that throughout the film. They all have all different kinds of takes, but I just found that to be really sort of powerful and moving. So I'll find the
Mm. The women we got to reproduce the nation, right? Because it even reminds me of like a lot of the like portrayals of like women militants or women soldiers still have like a baby on their back. You know what I mean? And so it's kind of like both and.
Yep.
So that's a very important question to think about, especially, for those of us who know revolution is inevitable. It's sort of like, how do we, that's the ethical dimensions, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, the first sort of thing that I've watched recently is Agents of Change, which is a film. It's a documentary about the founding of Black studies with a particular focus on San Francisco State and Cornell. And I teach Introduction to African American Studies. So that is one of the places that I watched it. But I also just found myself watching it on my own because there's so many residents. Because like even with the sort of student encampments and then the backlash against student encampments and against students struggling for Palestinian liberation, like Mamadou Tall is obviously one of the most sort of visible casualties of this increased repression, and ironically is at Cornell. So just thinking about the way the administration um, reacted to those 1968 protests at Cornell, when those students showed up armed, they occupied the president's building and they were armed, but they were not armed initially. They ended up being armed because the KKK and the police ended up teaming up, and these students were afraid. They were outnumbered, right? And these students were afraid that they were gonna shoot them up, and so they came to campus with like long guns. But the administration at that time realized like they did not want a news story, like they did not want things to escalate, and so they actually negotiated with these students, and ultimately they ended up getting like their Africana Studies department at that time. And so, and then the other thing I was thinking about with respect to San Francisco State is like what the demands were. And like those students were out of school for like months and semesters, and some of them didn't even come back. They didn't come back at all, or they came back much later. And what their demands were, they never had a demand for immunity. Like they just took the risk. Like obviously they sort of appeal to community and organize with community in order to like bail them out and to contribute, to do court support and those type of things, but they never expected that they wouldn't be charged for what they were doing, right? And so that's just something very interesting to think about in terms of the way that they understood their demands. And they also, there's something called Bloody Sunday that takes place at San Francisco State, where the National Guard got called in and they got like brutalized by the National Guard. Of course, Ronald Reagan in California is the sort of governor of California at that time. And as we know, it's out of these types of struggles that the exorbitant hike in tuition came, right? Because it was a combination of like the influx of racialized students on college and university campuses because of the 1965 Higher Education Act, but also because of that militancy. So the anti-war movement, the movement for like Black and ethnic studies, you know, um, women, women's liberation, all the struggles that were happening on campus. Ronald Reagan was like, well, if you want, being here is like a privilege. Like if you want to be here, you have to pay. And so that is like that moment, that 60-70 moment is like the sort of foundation of the exorbitant increase in tuition and the addition of fees. Right. It's the sort of takeoff point for the neoliberalization of the university. But I really recommend, so they have interviews with like people who were in those struggles, men and women, and there is some conversation about the different gender politics. There's conversations about like strategy and tactic, like some people were obviously more militant than others. And so to me it's just a really timely, even though it's like in they're talking about the 60s and 70s, it's a way for us to continue to think about struggle and how do you manage these different dynamics, because everybody didn't want to show up with guns. Of course, everybody didn't want to occupy buildings and kidnap faculty, but other people are like, this is what needs to be done. And so the way that they talk through how that was managed, I think, is really important. And then the second thing that I'll just mention briefly is there was an episode of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. I tweeted about this actually with Ziad El Dabolzi about East African Marxist-Leninism, Pan-Africanism, imperialism, and the Dar es Salaam debates. That was like one of the best interviews I've listened, like podcast interviews I've listened to. Number one, I don't know if they edited it. I don't think that they did, but he was just so clear. Like I feel like when I do interviews, I'm like and you know what I mean? Like all these verbal takes. He was just so incredibly clear. And then I really appreciated the fact that he talked about Abdul Rahman Babu, who I fucking love. I love Babu. And he talked about Danny Nabudere, and Danny Nabudere is like particular understanding of imperialism that's like Marxist adjacent, but it has its own logics that's based on like East African political economy at that time. And so it's actually just a really great, he thought, of course, Walter Rodney's up in there because they're talking about particular critiques of African socialism and of Ujamaa. And so it's a really, really interesting episode, and I think one where you'll hear about like revolutionaries, Marxist Leninists that you probably haven't heard of, because generally speaking, if we talk about Africa, it's generally West Africa or South Africa. We don't pay as much attention to East Africa. So I recommend that episode as well. And I like thinking the moment of sort of decolonization, and I think is important in general, especially people's orientation, number one, to anti-imperialism, and number two, to armed struggle. Like those really determined what the outcomes, right? How fast and how entrenched neocolonialism will become, I would say. Yeah.
If my phone was working, that would be what I'm listening to on the way home. But
something to look forward to.
I know.
Yeah,
what that means is I got to listen to all of the craziness on the train and or the bus going on.
Oh my gosh.
Taking public transportation is very humbling in this country.
That's why I try to avoid it at all costs. I'll just walk.
Okay, let's see. Oh yeah.
So something we're inspired by. Oh yes. Okay, I'm glad that we're here, y'all. Something that I was inspired by. Cory Booker. His phenomenal, what was it, 26-hour speech before Congress. That rousing rhetoric, amazing analysis, the profound democratic courage he conveyed in the face of tyranny, of fascism, of oppression, that wonky eye, keeping us engaged. Love. I'm just kidding, y'all. That was whack. for a number of reasons. But no, he's not even Strom Booker, because it wasn't a fucking filibuster. It wasn't even a filibuster. He just was like, I'm gonna do this now. He's like, I'm wearing this new deodorant. I'm gonna test it out.
I feel like
how long it lasts.
There was like a little interview with him afterwards where he was talking about how he had dehydrated himself and all that stuff. So I feel like that was the way he really wanted to do. He wanted to really talk about his physical prowess, by his ability to fucking stand up there for 25 hours and not use the bathroom.
Anywho, that means he needs a more fibrous diet. Okay. No, but really the thing that I am what I wanted to talk about is, there's a YouTube channel called Activist News Network that's really awesome. Ryan Napoli is the main sort of interviewer and curator of that channel, but he has something that he does called Gerald Horne Around the Horn, that they do like every week or every other week. And Gerald is I'm just always inspired by his analysis. He always tends to be so deeply engaged in what's happening around the world and able to connect what's happening like now to like 1481 and shit. It's like, who does that? So like, I really encourage people to tap into that analysis, because I think that Gerald, and it's funny now, his new thing, Gerald he'll have new things. Like he has particular things that he does. And now it's when he's like identity politics. And so he'll make that voice when he's like lambasting like Bernie Sanders or anybody's critique of identity politics. He'll go identity politics. And so that's very funny. Gerald, if you're watching this, you stole Tangerine Tyrant from me. Admit it. I want my credit.
Tangerine Tyrant?
Yes, I swear to God, I wrote it. I can find the tweet. That was my thing. And now we say it all the time without attribution, but it's okay. He can have it. He's done so much for the people. But anyway, yes. Please, I am so incredibly inspired by Around the Horn and just Gerald Horne's analysis in general, because it's important. Like he understands the historical situation, he understands the geopolitical situation, and I feel like it's not necessarily accessible per se, but it gives you things that you have to look into. And also, like we were talking about humor earlier, I appreciate his combination of like very serious analysis and humor. One of the things he used to say is that, Europe got tired of being the pips to the United States Gladys Knight. And so like he has like little quips that he will
That's
say
a
all the
very
time
old
that
black man of him.
that's very old black man and is very funny. And so he's just delightful and brilliant. And so that is mine.
Okay, so I had mentioned earlier that so the thing that inspired me this recently is a little bit more personal. So we had this new books and black feminists, new books in black feminism, like kind of book roundtable, and so it featured three authors. So obviously, I already mentioned Meredith's book. We tried to tell y'all, and then the other was Mary Frances Phillips, this Black Panther woman, on Erica Huggins' book. And then another woman, her book has not come out yet, but it'll be out soon. Amy Victoria Atkins Jones, I believe is her last name. And her book is entitled Immaculate Conceptions, A Black Mariology. And I think like the what is it? The origins of we think Christian assumptions about race, gender, and divine significance through the Virgin Mary, and specifically through a return to the Black Madonna. It's funny during the talk, she made a comment when they were one of the questions was like, how did you come to your project or whatever? And she was like, well, because I think she has a background in theology, but she's, that's not necessarily how she's oriented now. But she said, she made the comment, if Jesus is black, surely he got it from his mama. And she was just literally she was just thinking about the ways that the images, when we talk about like, what do you call it? Obviously Jesus as a Palestinian, and she was also thinking about like the black, like the thinking about when June Jordan's poem that ends like I am black and I've become Palestinian, and thinking about the relationship sort of between blackness and Palestinianness in this kind of moment. But anyway, so those are the books that were being discussed. The moment of like sort of inspiration was that Meredith has shared. So Meredith and I had a class together when we were in graduate school. It was ethnographies of Black communities, and she was sharing how parts of her. She was sharing in the talk like that coming to the book, there were things about like the fact that I was there in the audience was like really moving to her because there were ways that I had inspired her when we were in graduate school together. And it's funny because it made me think about how even her doing her work on Black Twitter at the time inspired a chapter that I have in my head of my dissertation, which was thinking about like Black Twitter hashtags and the types of conversations. So one, like the Dream Defenders at the time had a campaign, like they had taken was it Drake's song Never Loved Us, but they had created like this digital campaign of like all the ways that like America never loved us. And they had created like this kind of digital campaign about the history of Black folks in relationship to never loved us. And then I was thinking about too, there was I don't know if folks remember after Sandra Bland died, there was a Twitter hashtag was if I die in police custody. And people were talking about like, kind of challenging the narrative that had been told about obviously Sandra Bland committing suicide. And so she and I were just both having this like full circle moment where we had been in graduate school together. Like she said, she had never intended to write a book. Her book has just come out. Obviously, I'm in the throes of mine, and thinking about like I always just think about like when I've been to talks, and not just academic talks, but even like movement places where like you don't think about the ways that people are connected, and then you realize that there are all of these intricate webs where like people. And so there was like another woman in the audience who's a graduate student. She came up to me afterwards. She's like, it never occurred to me that like y'all like would have known each other and have these like long connections. And I think about like even in some of the kind of like the traditions of like the Barbara Smiths and the Toni Morrisons and like them coming together at the particular moment in the 80s, in the early 90s, and making a decision to say, okay, like we're going to write together, we're going to produce together, like we're going to cite one another, and we're going to like, be involved in this project of creating a particular kind of canon of Black feminist literary work and literary criticism where we are in conversation with each other. And so for me, it was just inspiring to be kind of in the throes or in the midst of that kind of full circle moment. And also like I told Meredith, but like I don't think, even though we've been in spaces with each other since then, neither one of us has ever really acknowledged the ways that just those small things about like being informed about what I was doing and what she was doing helped push our thinking and our own projects along. And so that was just, it was just a meaningful moment for me recently.
Woohoo! She's, well, I'll talk to you about that offline. Any hooser, that is very inspiring. I feel similarly. So Jarvis is probably like that person for me because we went to graduate school together, and maybe one of our full circle moments. We've had several. We've been on the podcast, but one of them is like doing that fellowship at Harvard, because it was like he like, that him and Brandon Terry organized it. But it's great to, Black academia in particular is like a small place, Okay, so now we wanted to talk about Dean Spade, 2 books by Dean Spade. So I think that it started like, I had been listening to Mutual Aid, and then once you get done on Audible, they recommend you a title or some shit. And I think did I send it to you? And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And so you started listening to that, and I was listening to Mutual Aid or something like that. So anyway, we both ended up and then talked about how we enjoyed them. And so we both ended up listening to the other ones. The other Dean Spade book. And so, but I tweeted about it. I really enjoyed Mutual Aid, which was surprising, right? Because I think that he's much more critical of particular types of leadership than I am. And there's a lot of like horizontal language and stuff like that. That's not necessarily my politic. But I think that, because y'all know, I've been asking, like, what the fuck is mutual aid? Like, people be using like mutual aid requests, and it's usually like donating to a GoFundMe. And so I think that he did a really good job of distinguishing between mutual aid versus charity, as well as talking about conflict in organizations, burnout. There's all kinds of topics that I just found to be particularly useful. And, and it's a great book for political education, like to, pull out the things that are useful, but then also to maybe critique the things that don't necessarily pertain to one's organization. And then Love in a Fucked Up World. Do you want to talk about that one, Layla?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think these are all just the things that I think I'm personally struggling with and navigating, right? So like you all know, I'm not going to like have a long rehashing of this, but thinking about relationships, how we are in relationship to one another. It's funny because when I so after the People's Forum thing, I went to dinner with my cousin who came to the talk and my former student who came to the talk. And both of them are now living in New York, one of whom is heterosexual, one of whom is queer. And we were talking about like dating. And one of the things that they complained about was that one thing, like as much as I talk about dating is terrible as a Black person in Boston, they were like, dating is actually terrible in New York too. And the part of the problem with dating in New York is that there is the illusion of like options. And so like people are not dating seriously, and like everybody wants to be like, ethically non-monogamous or whatever other bullshit. And people are like, I actually want to like be with a person. Like I want to be with a person. I want to be with my person. I don't want to be having all this like casual sex. But then also like what I appreciate about Dean Spade's framing of Love in a Fucked Up World is that as much as he is talking about romantic interpersonal relationships, he's also talking about friendships. He's also talking about like, how do we do relationality in general? And like, how do we understand our limitations as we come to, expect people to be either extensions of ourselves or representations of ourselves. How do we do friendship and intimate lover partner relationships where we can be both supporting of who people are, but like not trying to like be controlling of our relationships with people in terms of like their relationship with other people. And so I think what I like, Sharice says she doesn't like stories, but like there are like these little
vignettes
where like Dean Spade shares like, case studies or whatever of like a particular relationship dynamic that folks are working through, and then gives ways of thinking about, okay, well, what are the questions that we might ask when something happens here? Like that book comes with the workbook as well, and the workbook is like things to ask yourself. And so it's even thinking about questions of like jealousy, scarcity mentalities as we think about dating, how do you deal with conflict, you know, romance,
Matching wounds.
yeah, all those kinds of things. So
Yeah.
those are like general things. I really like this idea of revolutionary promiscuity. It made me think about when what's the book that we read on the woman who was like the civil rights fundraiser icon,
Oh, Molly Moon.
Molly Moon.
Yeah.
Remember when you asked, what's the author's name?
Tanisha.
Remember when you asked Tanisha about whether or not Molly Moon was like promiscuous, and then
Intellectually
yeah,
promiscuous
intellectually
or
promiscuous,
politically promiscuous.
politically promiscuous, and like Tanisha was like, "What do you mean by that?" And
Mhm.
like to me, the way that Dean Spade is theorizing revolutionary promiscuity is also was like in the way that you were also thinking about promiscuity, political promiscuity, in that like we need to think about our relationships doing different things and like not trying to
Mhm.
be any one thing, all things from any one person. So I found
Mhm.
it useful in that way.
Yeah, and the thing I think that the really interesting thing about that book is that he is let me take these headphones off. I feel like they're um let's see. Oh, say something.
Can you hear me?
Okay, yes. Yes, okay,
Oh,
sorry. So I
but
think
wait, now we're getting feedback.
now
Okay,
you
stop,
okay,
stop,
it was
stop.
giving feedback before. All right. So basically what I think is interesting about the book is that he's talking about like a dating guide that's outside of the capitalist like therapist framework. He's saying he's drawing on some of that information, but basically most any like dating or like relationship books are ensconced in like a white heteropatriarchal capitalist non-movement framework. And so he's trying to take those ideas and apply them to um revolutionaries, right?
Yeah,
People who are in movement, people who are in organizations. And so I think it's gone. I think the Tony, I think it's
it happens when I speak. It's okay. Yeah, it is gone. It is gone. Okay.
okay. Um, okay, so do we want to start with love? So again, that book is called Loved in a Fucked Up World.
Okay, so here's the thing, y'all. We in our doc we got page numbers, but I don't know. But I have my page numbers from my ebook, and I don't know if they're the same as your page numbers. So I will try to pull them up so that folks can see it. But we might have to do some searching around for exactly what you're looking for.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, because I have an ebook too. It's EPUB. I don't know,
That's
but
what I have to do. So then maybe they are on the same page.
pages. Yeah.
Is this the right one? That's the mutual aid. Okay, this one. So 11 to fuck that bro. Okay.
Yeah, so basically, so I don't know that we need to like read through it verbatim,
Yeah.
but basically what I think is really so part of what I was thinking about when I'm not gonna lie to y'all, what I was thinking a lot about this particular section was our first experience with Black Power media.
Mm,
And like if we had this book at that time, and even the mutual aid book, if we had like read those resources, like if things would have gone differently, I don't know. But I do think that this idea of disposability culture is actually really salient, like casting people out, even like, when not sort of fighting for people that you're dating or even like friendships or whatever, this idea that it's like, oh well they're gone, we don't need them, that type of thing. And Dean talks a lot about like how this is related to like our childhood experiences and childhood wounds. And I think that that's true. And I also think it's probably related to other experience that we have that aren't necessarily childhood, but that like as we are moving through the world, we create these patterns that are that we then like script people into, right? But
mhm.
anyway, this idea of like disposability. I hate the term like when it's like everything is whatever culture, diet culture, whatever. But I do think that disposability is a thing that becomes very inculcated in how we like relate to one another. So
Yeah, I've noticed that we both follow this. I can't remember her name. She's like a therapist online who is like,
the Black lady.
yeah, who's like really kind of pushing back against a lot of these like I know one of the ones that I think about a lot is when she talks about like, this idea of having to cope means that like you haven't created a particular you haven't created a way of dealing with the world. So like always having to have coping mechanisms as ways of escaping, as opposed to like actually generating tools to kind of deal. Like you're gonna in life, you're gonna deal with hard shit. And so like even this idea about like because we don't like a person, because a person doesn't agree with us, we get to just like not ever deal with them again, rather than in some instances I think that is necessary, but in other instances like there are ways that we actually do need to like have a politics of accountability, to like struggle with people over why it is that your behavior is problematic, is dangerous, is is counter revolutionary, is creating these types of dynamics inside of our groups, rather than always like just sort of throwing people away. So that is something that I appreciated from that as well.
Mm-hmm. And then saying like, what do we do? Like, what is the experience of like the perpetrator, if you will, the person who did harm, and the person who experienced harm, and what needs to be true for it not to happen again?
Yeah.
And generally speaking, for that not to happen again, it's not to kick people, it's not to like cast people out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so like this, a lot like this scarcity mentality, right? Like a lot of people talk about like one, it comes up in like some educational literature when you talk about like deficit models,
Mm-hmm.
and like and I often think people use the term like think with like an abundance mindset, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that that is difficult for a lot of us, because like things are not in abundance. Like I remember having this conversation with my dad. We were talking about the phenomena. Like I don't know how many of you all are like parts of families where there's like an older set of siblings and a younger set of siblings, but I am. And I know in situations in families where there's like older siblings and younger siblings, there's always this like kind of I don't know, little like ribbing between the older ones and the younger ones. Like the younger ones, you don't have it like we had it, right? Like things are easier. And like part of the reason why, like my dad will say, well, part of the reason why like things were easier when you and your brother came along is like, well, we had most shit. Like, when we had our first set of kids, like, we had less things. And so we were
Mm-hmm.
options. We had less things. And so, like, when you don't have a lot and your kids are around your house, like breaking your shit and tearing up shit, like the first thing you think about is like, oh, like I gotta replace that. And I don't have the resources to kind of replace that, which then makes you like come down on a hammer, on kids more. It's like, and then you created like, kids being the typical, perhaps clumsy, messy, beings that they are in the world, get sort of demonized and villainized for this, when scarcity is the way that we sort of exist. And so like the scarcity mentality then sort of bleeds over into other things, right? And so like when we meet a person that we like, but perhaps it doesn't work out, we're like, oh, scarcity mentality says that like I have to stay with this person because nothing else is gonna sort of come along better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like believing that there's a possibility that like, okay, I exist in the world. And that's me and my dad have this conversation all the time. He's like, well, if you exist in the world and you have friends that exist like there's clearly more people in the world that exist like you. And so even though yes, like, yeah, we're living in fucked up situations and scenarios, but we're not unicorns. We're not the only ones that exist like us. And so there are other people in the world that perhaps we haven't come into contact with. Whatever, that there are other possibilities. And so I felt like just reframing the kind of notion of like moving away from scarcity mentality, particularly when it comes to people. And when it comes to like how people exist in the world was something that was really important that I drew from this text also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, we do these calculations. Like, it's
Yeah.
kind of like when there's 6 people and everybody want to split the check. It's like, well, I had the water. Like, everybody turns into a mathematician. We can get into that mentality, like, when it comes to like relationships. Like, how is this going to benefit me? What am I going to lose? What am I going to gain? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that does come from, literally like an economism. Because like one of the definition I learned for economics in 6th grade is economics is how people choose to use scarce resources to satisfy their wants.
Mhm.
And it's like there's actually enough for everybody. The scarcity is only linked to like, capitalism and hierarchy.
Yep.
So the other thing too, so Something that really spoke to me and that I found useful is like, so he has this tool called 7 Steps for De-escalating a Crush or Obsession. And I think that that is a good practical tool. I'm not gonna lie to you, I have had some intense crushes, and he goes into like the types of things that we do when we're crushing on people, like the projections, how we'll like obsess about them, think about them, and the feelings that come with like the embodied feelings, but also like, you know, projecting our own understanding of people that will only ultimately lead in disappointment because it's not rooted in reality, right?
Mhm.
And it's also it's a means of like distraction. It's a means of, you know, resolving boredom and all these types of things. But yeah, man, like when he like, yeah, Layla knows.
I
I
do.
I can crush on a person for years. But you know what? I was thinking about this. It's because like I like so few people that I think when I like somebody, I really like them. Anywho, but no, I just found that tool to be actually super useful to thinking about, because these things become like, it can become dangerous, right? Like if you take these, if crushes come turn into a session, so mine never turn into a session, but like when you take them to like their logical extremes, even if it just stays at the crush level, there are particular ways you can disrupt relationships. It can like take over your life in particular ways. And so like these questions and these steps that are outlined, I think are very useful. You know, and especially if we think about our organizations, like if you have a crush on somebody in the organization, but you know this is not good for
Mhm.
the entity, perhaps go through these steps and take a beat. Like, because what's more important is keeping like probably the organization together and the you know, being rooted in reality than like these crushes that we can develop from time to time, which makes sense. You know, it makes sense in academia when stuff like this happens. It makes sense in organizations when you feel like people share your principles, you're
Yeah.
really committed to something, you're in this together. It can be really easy to develop those feelings, but we just have to keep them in perspective.
But then when them things go away, it creates issues for everybody involved because now you don't want to be around this person, you can't work with this person.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it is like we've talked about this before. I think it absolutely makes sense that we would want to find partners in spaces where we feel like there is political alignment and comradeship. But but also another thing that I appreciate about this too is like that Dean Spade raises is like being clear about like what it is that you want out of a relationship. And so if you know that you are in a place in your life where you want casual types of relationships, then like a casual relationship in an organizing space may or may not, like that might not be the place to have a casual relationship because all of different types of things get involved, and there's a particular, I think, kind of ethics and politics that goes into making those decisions to say, okay, if I want to be involved in casual sex with somebody, this ain't the place to do it. Like,
Mm.
find somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not, but it's also like not just even, it could even just be like these emotional entanglements that people get in.
Yeah,
It's not just like sex. It's like emotional relationships, like obsessive texting, like
yeah,
all those things. Cause you know, again, when they're not rooted in reality, it's just the intensity of that, like which he talks a lot about, like that sort of romantic period, which is not just reducible
yeah.
to romantic relationships, but like we call it the honeymoon
The honeymoon
period.
phase. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like once that wears off, like there's all these conflicts that arise, and like if we're not rooted in reality and seriousness, then it's more likely to come up. So
Why
very
did Rao say people want partners in situations? I just need more minions. Why do I feel like that's something that you would say?
right. I feel like that's right. Yeah. Like seriously, it's like just pine over me in secret and do what I
What
say.
is wrong with you?
Differently now though, it's like I found my life partner, and that definitely has my ass rooted in reality shit.
You are ridiculous. Okay.
Like it is real. Okay, so what's the other,
The romance cycle.
so I've already gestured to this, but I'll just say briefly, like it was really interesting when he talked about like things that we often project onto romantic relationships also exist between friends and in our
Mhm.
organization. So it was particularly interesting when he talked about like going from the honeymoon stage to the conflict cycle in the context of an organization. Like you know, when you first join an organization, you're like, yeah, oh my God, like everything is new and novel, everybody's getting along. you're trying to find your place, you find your place, and then after a while, when things start to get difficult, like we can reproduce the same types of dynamics that we do in romantic relationships vis-a-vis the organization or vis-a-vis our comrades in the organization,
Yeah.
which create all kinds of problems, right? If we don't address them properly.
There now, there was one just like two paragraphs that I wanted to read about this
Okay.
revolutionary promiscuity.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I thought I had highlighted it. Oh yeah. So this is one thing that I really appreciated. I've often wished we could treat our friends more like lovers and our lovers more like friends. In
Mm.
defiance of the romance myth, I want us to pour our attention and care and generosity into our friendships rather than ditching them carelessly when romance calls. At the same time, I wish we could hold our sex and dating relationships more lightly, caring about them and being good to each other, but disentangling from the romance myth idea that this is where we are supposed to get all of our love and support. So much of the harm that unfolds within sexual and romantic relationships comes from this tight grip, the ways our sense of worth and our fears of engulfment and abandonment get exceptionally stirred up by lovers. When I imagine real freedom and liberation in our relationships, we are holding each other with tenderness and realistic expectations. True intimacy means we work to see each other not just through the projections of perfection and wish fulfillment during the early phases and then disappointment and blame as conflict arises, but instead as the complex, flawed, exquisitely gorgeous beings that we are. This means accepting compassionately that we will perceive reality differently, especially around our sore spots. It means accepting that we will love each other imperfectly, that we must all give and receive feedback, and that none of us is entirely aware of our motivations. We must accept with compassion that none of us is living perfectly in line with our values or intentions, and we must support our efforts towards an alignment. I really appreciated that, thinking about the relationship between friendships and romantic relationships for a number of reasons. But it was making me think. I don't know how many people like watch Sterling K. Brown and Ryan Michelle Bass little relationship podcast, but there was a conversation where like Sterling asked if Ryan like liked him, and she was like, "Yeah." She's like, "I like that you don't embarrass me." And he was like, "What do you mean by that?" And it's funny because like in the comments, a lot of the women were like, "Yeah, like the being embarrassed by your partner is like a really is a particular kind of thing." But it was just making me think about like, I don't have a child, but particularly like when I think about like a partner that I might be with, I think, oh, like, with my friends, I can accept that we have for the most part shared like baseline shared political beliefs, but we have differences. Like we don't agree on everything. And I accept that in my friendships. But then when I think about like a romantic partner, it's fine to a certain level, but then I think about having kids. Then I think about, okay, now like I do actually want us to be aligned on these very particular types of things when it comes to like creating a person in the world. But this really sort of made me kind of think about like, okay, how is it that like, again, we're not all always living in alignment with exactly the things that we say, and like we have to make room for that. And if we took our romantic relationships a little less seriously in that regard and like learn from the way that we do friendships, but also like reprioritize friendships in ways that like as people typically as people partner off, they tend to spend like less time with their friends over time or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And to realize that even as we develop like long-term romantic partnerships, that maintaining a proper space for our friendships is an important thing to do. And that like we can have space for people to like be mostly aligned, but still have some differences of thought and ways of being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just feels way more existential. Like when you're with, there's something about that, like close quarters of a romantic relationship and the split, I guess, splitting bills, like living in the same house, like, you know what I mean? Like it
Yes.
just feels, you were married, like, the it just feels way more high stakes. But I think that he's right that it's like it doesn't have to be that way. Like this is
Mhm.
a culturation, and it's based on all kind of shit, but it doesn't like have to be that way if we don't want it to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, y'all, I see people like nod, like metaphorically nod their heads in the chat, like pick it up. Side note, it's on LibGen on EPUB, but I'm
Yes.
not trying to mess up a Dean Spade bag, but there you go. Um, okay, so next is mutual aid. There's
Yeah.
so much, like I said, there's so much good stuff in this mutual aid book, but I wanted to just quickly talk through chapter 4, which is about some dangers and pitfalls of mutual aid. And again, I come to this book honestly because I people will use the term mutual aid so much, especially online spaces, and I'm like, what? I don't understand like exactly what this means. And Dean Spade lays out why it's confusing. It's because mutual aid is used in ways that is like it's not mutual aid. People are just using this language, but mutual aid means something particular. But anyway, when he taught in some dangers and pitfalls of mutual aid, he writes, so this is on page 26, that opening paragraph. Um,
My pages numbers are different. What's the beginning of the paragraph? I'll find it.
it's just scroll, it's literally right above this. It's at the very beginning of the chapter.
Oh,
Scroll.
okay.
Yep, some dangers. So it's even while they explicitly work to reject the charity model, mutual aid projects can slip into some of the well-worn grooves of that model if we don't root deeply in our principles and practice careful discernment. Sorry, mutual aid groups face 4 dangerous tendencies: dividing people into those who are deserving and undeserving of help, practicing saviorism, being co-opted, and collaborating with efforts to eliminate public infrastructure and place it with private enterprise and volunteerism. And so basically, what he's saying, like, it's, I don't know if they're self explanatory or not, but when he talks about deservingness hierarchies, it's kind of like basically what the state does is say who can and cannot get resources based on all kinds of things. If you're a single mom, if you're drug addicted, like if you are don't have an address, for example, and you're houseless. And so we can reproduce those tendencies within our organizations. But part of the point of mutual aid is that to collapse these hierarchies. This is stuff for everybody, right? No matter, or the deciding factor is not any sort of hierarchical characteristic. And then in terms of saviorism and paternalism, it's sort of like when we're engaging in mutual aid, we're not doing it in a sort of, again, a hierarchical fashion or a way that's like we're the experts and you're the receivers, therefore we know more than you, et cetera, et cetera. That's paternalism, right? This is because we all, like, mutual aid means we're all in this world and we all organize and we're all organizing to fill in these gaps that the state has left and that these nonprofits professionalize. And so we need to engage in different dynamics. And then co-optation, of course, is the way that slowly, oftentimes, these mutual aid groups can move towards nonprofitization to get money. And so he talks about like basically if going for money and these these federal grant, or not federal anymore, but anyway, foundation grants is one of the main ways that mutual aid groups get co-opted, in the sort of freedom and kind of what they, like, he calls like a horizontal nature of the organization gets co-opted. And so instead of like going for grants, he's like beg, borrow, and steal, right? Like get it how you live, because that is the main way, like crowdsource the money. That is one of the main ways to keep mutual aid
Yeah.
without these distortions. And then finally, what was the last one? Did I miss it? No, co-optation, that was the last one. And then, and then he goes on to talk, like he gives this sort of typology of characteristics of mutual aid versus charity. But then some questions to ask are like, who controls the project? Who makes decisions about what we do? Does any of the funding we receive come with strings attached that limit who we can help or how we help? Do any of our guidelines about who can participate in our work cut out stigmatized and vulnerable people? What is our relationship to law enforcement? A very important one. And how do we introduce new people in our group to our approach to law enforcement? So there's a lot to say, especially when he's comparing mutual aid to charity. But I think that that's a really good place to start. And it's really interesting because of the relationship between sort of responsibility and participation without sort of rigidity and like hierarchy.
Sorry, I was reading the comments. I was just seeing that Kayla said, I struggle with this book being assigned a public health be assigned in a public health graduate course like yes, mutual aid is critical, and why are professors and PhD students discussing this instead of discussing the academic institutions and hiding them and holding them accountable. Um, but this, I mean, so well, one thing I think about is like, people like to hold up the particular, the free breakfast program and even the history of sort of like the ambulance, what do you call it? Emergency health services, as like these early mutual aid projects. But one of the issues with the Black Panther Party is that a lot of that mutual aid work that they were doing was being funded by these white liberals. And so whenever they weren't necessarily holding on. I mean, it's the same thing about SNCC. I mean, at the moment
Mhm.
that SNCC is largely being funded by, I mean, perhaps folks that are in the membership of SNCC at that time, but donors and funders control agendas. And so when it is that you want to make connections with things like public health to larger political agendas, then the if mutual aid is not if it's not really what is funding these sort of projects as opposed to like wealthy liberal donors, then it actually changes the nature of these types of projects. So to me, it makes sense that you would be reading that I mean,
Mhm.
whatever. Like school, like university curriculum, obviously, like they're always determined by whoever it is that is teaching the class. These are not uniform practices, even across disciplines. Like there's some consensus about what we should be reading or should not be reading. But to me, it makes sense that a professor concerned with public health in a particular kind of way would be concerned about having that conversation.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and sometimes people incorporate these type of books to feign like outward facing, you know what I mean, like orientation, or because like it's the thing to do to incorporate like popular books, like popular being like non-academic books,
Yeah.
but like okay, but also like what are you gonna do about it? There was another section on burnout. Again, I won't go too much into it. But I think that what's really important. So, me and Eric have spoken about this from time to time. People talk a lot about capacity, like, but then I think that the issue about capacity comes up when, so I think it's page like 58, Layla. I don't know.
Okay.
When people are dealing with capacity, they're generally like moving toward burnout, but burnout comes from a particular orientation to the work, right? He says that burnout is more than just exhaustion that comes from working too hard. Most often people I meet who describe themselves as burnt out have been through a painful conflict in a group they were working with and quit because they were hurt and unsatisfied by how it turned out. Burnout is a combination of resentment, exhaustion, shame, and frustration that makes us lose connection to pleasure and passion in the work and instead encounter difficult feelings like avoidance, compulsion, control, and anxiety. If it were just exhaustion, we could take a break and rest and go back. But people who feel burnt out often feel they cannot return to the work, that the group or work they were part of, or the work because it's toxic.
Yeah.
And so I like, he talks a lot about like, so there's a lot in burnout that's about like control and feeling like you're the only one that can do this work, or feeling like a martyr for the work, right? That like, I have to do this and nobody else can do it. Or like, this sort of like self-sacrifice that allows you to like judge others or to have a feeling of superiority, etc. That all of these feelings like contribute to and also are a sign of burnout, and
Yeah.
that working yourself up into this state is not good for the organization. Like sacrificing to that point for the organization ultimately just causes conflict and um sustainability issues for the organization.
Yeah. Which is why I think the section on like collective consensus decision making is important because
Mm.
like I think a part of why we experience burnout so much like in work environments is because we feel like we're doing things for folks who we fundamentally like don't have beliefs and politics in alignment with, and then for people who we don't feel in community with, right? And that's
Mm.
our relationship to burnout at work. But if it is that we are in community organizations and we are with people who we feel like at least more than not we feel in alignment with, then we should be creating mechanisms to sort of curtail arriving at burnout, because it should be that we can trust other folks to help us make decisions and to help carry out tasks. And we also know the reality is that, and I mean, my reality has been that in many organizations that I've been involved in, there is a small but mighty few who do the vast majority of the kind of labor, whether that be gendered because of expectations about like who does like sort of reproductive work or secretarial work or administrative work, or whether that is, a small group of people who are the kind of ideas people. But again, I think that part of the reason why I think political education is important is that part of our responsibility is to create groups of people who we feel like are equipped. Because like, it's one thing when we say like people don't know enough to make decisions. Okay, well, part of the reason why we're attempting to read together, to struggle together, to study together is so that there is a point from where to build a consensus so that we can have consensus decision making. And so I do think that it is difficult to think about the concept of consensus decision making when you don't feel like folks are on the same page about things and are aligned. If you feel like people have fundamentally different values. And that's why I think that work of getting to there is such critical foundational work in organizations.
So did we say community? I don't recall saying community. What's meant by community as it relates to organizations?
I might have said community. What I meant is just like outside of like our strict labor relationships to work, like when we go to work at a hospital or go to work at a university, as opposed to other kinds of relationships where supposedly like these are political organizations or any other kind of sort of neighborhood organizations, wherever you might be engaging in forms of mutual aid, which is a different relationship to work than when we go to work for a paycheck every day. That's probably the context in which I use community.
So the other thing I appreciated that was just a sort of short, but kind of, it was in the conflict section. I don't even know, these page numbers I put are not correct.
I know, we just have
yeah. So basically, if you
have a sentence, I can find it. If you have a sentence that you copied, like that's how I found this one. So if you just start talking, I can find it in the document.
Out of the night that covers me. I understand. Okay, so it's about so just type in maybe social media, because basically this is about like talking in person, using direct communication before using social media or gossip.
Yeah, that's right there.
That I think is really important and really germane to this current moment of organizing, because the social media part in particular, this is not something that our four parents had to face when it came to organizing, right? People weren't publishing smack talking the Black Panther newspaper or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, or maybe they were, but that's a different speed, that's a different intensity, like, and a different approach than people who can automatically go and like dump their purse out or air their grievances like on social media and then gossip. And I think particularly being very clear about the difference between like criticism and gossip, right? Like, so criticism in the organizational sense, and then gossip, which can be very difficult, especially when we are in these organizations and there's a conflation of like, oh, this is our family, these are our comrades, right? There can be a sort of mixing, like a Elysian of all of those dynamics, so that like you're calling up somebody to talk about an issue, but the issue, but it's not necessarily unprincipled. It can be unprincipled. It's not necessarily unprincipled, but it's not in a way that's meant to like come up with a resolution. That's how I would think about the difference between like sort of criticism and like gossip. And these things become toxic because ultimately, they just create divisive and sort of cliquey dynamics, which Dean talks about a lot, is like the development of like cliques and groups within the organizations that then sort of construct different power dynamics or forms of relationships. So I found that particular part interesting and germane.
Yeah, I had already mentioned the consensus building, consensus decision making. But the other thing that just really stuck out to me from that conversation was learning to value and desire. Hopefully, I can find it. Ah, this I said on page 63, but I don't know. It's also like this document doesn't have. Oh yeah. So learning to value and desire other people's participation. So in addition to avoiding the problem of having majorities vote down minorities and silence vulnerable groups, consensus decision making establishes a culture of desiring others' participation. Decision making systems focused on competition, on getting my idea to be the one that wins, cultivate disinterest in other people's participation. Consensus decision making requires participants to bring forward proposals to be discussed and modified until everyone is sufficiently satisfied that no one will block the proposal. This means participants get to practice wanting to hear other people's concerns and other people's creative approaches to resolving them. If the goal of our movements is to mobilize hundreds of millions of people, we need to genuinely want others' participation, even when others bring different ideas or disagree with how we think things should be done. Most people will not stay and commit to intense, unpaid work if they get little say in shaping that work. We need ways of practicing wanting one another's participation, not just going along with what charismatic or authoritative people say. In our culture, we get a lot of practice either going along with bossy people or trying to be the boss, but it's time to learn something different. So I really appreciated that particular perspective. Because I also think of like it's something that, people who are intellectuals, academics, people who are used to being in situations where, I know about these things. So like, let me just lead us. And I think that there's a time and a place for that. But I also do think that it is important for us to be engaged in a practice that allows us to listen to folks, even when we think we know where they're going, even when we think we already disagree with them. Because I do think that particular point about like people are not gonna want to stay for long in places where nobody wants to hear what they have to say.
Mhm.
And there are plenty of people who are happy to show up and do the work when they feel like, okay, this person that is making decisions, I trust them, I believe in them. But also like that takes time to develop those kinds of relationships with people and to develop that type of trust. So I think just that the call to cultivate the practice of value, like just valuing hearing what people have to say, like even if you disagree with them, figuring out like how do you then work from saying, okay, well, you shared your idea, share my idea. I do think that that's something that for the sakes of efficiency, time, whatever, a lot of us just feel like, okay, I don't have time for this, we don't need to engage in this. But I actually do think that exhibiting an amount of sort of like a revolutionary patience with one another is something that we really struggle with. And it is why many organizations have their downfall. And then on the flip side, I think it's why we have people who have like blind cult like followings. And so yes, a person might start in the beginning like making good decisions for the group, but then at the point in which they are no longer making good decisions for the group, people have to have discernment to be able to say, okay, this is no longer where we want to go. And there has to be room and space in organizations, amongst groups, to say you're going in a direction that we are no longer comfortable with as a group. Even though we might have trusted your leadership for 10 years, you've now
Mhm.
come to a place where we can't trust it no more.
Yeah, and leadership doesn't mean making all the decisions all the time. That's just not leadership. Leadership is like stewarding the process or the objectives along.
Mm-hmm.
Um so but I mean I will say I think what's difficult about con- consensus. We've
Mm-hmm.
all been in those organizations where there's those one or two people who for whatever reason always got an issue with something and not necessarily solution oriented, right? And so this idea, so the consensus in the way that is explained in the book, where it's like nothing, everybody has to come to an agreement, and like you keep on presenting the proposal and modifying it. I struggle with that, but I do think ultimately I agree with what you said, that and also that this what John is saying, like we don't have economic power, we don't have state power, we only have access to social power, so it makes perfect sense to value and not see people around us as disposable.
Mm-hmm.
um And so, but there has to be, again, the goodwill and the trust has to be forged whereby, and I think that that's the difficult part, like sort of developing those relationships. Um, yeah, so it's definitely a process. I mean, I am also believe in democratic centralism. I'm not gonna lie about that. But democratic centralism, the democratic part is not just a place filler, right? There's a level of accountability and consultation that happens throughout that process, but it is not that everybody gets a say in everything.
Yeah, but I don't even think Dean Spade is saying that everybody gets a say in everything in the consensus building process. Because even like some of the stuff that he was talking about, was like there was different mechanisms, like folks who want to register their discontent but don't necessarily want to block things, and I think that those things are important to know. And this is just it's related to this, but it's an aside. Like I remember years ago we were at the Highlander School in Tennessee, and like we were young. We didn't know a whole lot about like the area in Tennessee, but apparently that where the school is, out on the outskirts of where the school is like claim country. And we had been told that we were there, and it's like in the mountains, and you can kind of go. And like it was late at night, we had a bonfire, and the person who was largely could read and considered a leader of the group, like they just decided they want to like go for a walk out in the woods late at night. And people just started following this person. And I was like, do y'all like, because I stayed back, I asked like the folks who work at the Highlander, like, at what places, like, where is what's the sort of limits of the property? Like, at what point are we getting to a place where we should be concerned? Da, da, da. And they asked, but other people were just like willing to kind of like blindly follow. And like that's something that has
Mm-hmm.
always made me nervous. And I think that comes a lot out of like our charismatic preacher culture. Like
Mm-hmm.
folks are just willing to blindly follow people. And I think that there just has to be more in between than the
Mm-hmm.
kind of dictatorial folks and then like the sheep, the lambs being led to the slaughter. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm always just thinking about that regard. Because like I don't know. I don't have a problem listening to things for a while. I mean, like everybody has their limits, right? But I also am not a person that feels like I come into a space always having all the answers either. And so that's why I'm always open to listening to what folks have to say.
I just think if it's directional, right? So we can discern between like directional discussion and criticism and shit that feels like, because there was that whole counterinsurgency document was like the way that you shut down an organization from doing anything is to keep on insisting on discussion and discussion and discussion and discussion. And so when things just feel like they're going around in circles or they're not sort of, it's the intent is not progressive, then yeah, I
Yeah,
think.
I agree. Around talking about you had me fucked up at bonfire because that insinuation we're outside in nature. We were. I just said we were in the mountains of Tennessee at the Highlander folk school, a folk education school. But yeah, I mean, I
That's
think
true. So
bonfires are
what to Josh's point, it's like we have to know how people get in power and we have to know
yeah,
how to get them out of power. If those
yes,
two things are not present, then it's just arbitrary.
yeah,
But that also but also what can the other sort of side, one other side to that dynamic is that people just defer, like people just kind of like defer to people. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Not because of any like not because of respecting or whatever. It's because it's like, well,
yeah,
they're gonna do the work and they just become the de facto leaders. And then on the back end is when people want to critique, right?
yeah.
Or
That does.
people want and so like building the democracy or building whatever the process or the apparatus is from the outset, I think is really important because otherwise people just end up
It does.
in
It,
these
it definitely happens. Yeah.
yeah. Could you vote your way out of what?
No,
um,
I found that with myself. Like I am perfectly happy to play my role as a part of the group, but then also when I get to a point where I feel like, okay, this shit ain't going nowhere. So
mhm.
somebody
Call the question, God damn it. Call the question. Yes. So, anywho, y'all, that's our discussion, our meandering discussion of love in a fucked up world and mutual aid. Shout out to Dean Spade. I appreciate that they have like a trifecta of books now. The first book was about like trans liberation and a critique of nonprofits. space or something like this. And so this is the Love in a Fucked Up World is the third book, Mutual Aid is the second book. And I really appreciate their contribution. Again, it's not about agreeing with every single thing. Dean wouldn't say you have to agree with everything I say. It's just a basis for conversation and actually thinking deeply. Too many of us start organizations or start entities, and we've all been a part of this, where like we don't put proper procedures in place until a conflict arises, and then it's too late, because you cannot build the plane and fly it at the same time. And so thinking about these questions and thinking about how we want to relate to the organization, to one another, in terms of our organizations, in terms of our interpersonal relationships, I think is important from the outset. That is part of the revolutionary struggle. It's not woo woo. It's not superfluous. Like, these are many of the reasons why organizations collapse, why movements become they lose momentum, is because of these interpersonal things.
Yep.
And like
interpersonal, no, personal, petty, fucked up ways of dealing with other people too.
mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I know we had a little bit more, but we are solidly approaching 2.5 hours.
No, clearly, yeah. So we have this whole revolution part that we probably can. I mean, I feel like it's evergreen. We could probably save it for next time.
I think maybe we could just play that little video, and then we can like end on that conversation.
Well, that's a whole conversation, like to stay or to go.
Okay, well, we can also just wrap it up.
Yeah. So basically, yeah. So because I feel like we wanted to end with revolution, because we didn't know if this was too study, but I feel like we unfolded the revolutionary part. So thanks 109 people for sticking with us for these 2.5 hours. This is LDI numbers, and this is the second week in a row. So
yes.
There was two things that I did start. I don't know if we want to address them quickly. I find Sylvia Wynter's work as helpful in navigating limitations of mainstream intersectionality. Any thoughts on that? I agree. She has that one article, like a critique of bourgeois and Marxist Leninist feminism or something like that. And it's a great piece. And yeah, Sylvia Wynter is helpful if you have time. Is a useful critique of many things, of the very structure of knowledge and
being.
And being, right. The constituting analogy of classarchy. Anywho, so this person said, Nene said, how do you feel about the works of authors like Chinua Achebe and Ngugi wa Thiong'o?
So I will obviously Ngugi's stuff is on like decoloniality of the mind, and I'm not well read on Chinua Achebe. Like, I've read Things Fall Apart, obviously, and I'm not widely read on Chinua Achebe, but I would be curious to know like what, I don't know if you're still in the chat, but like what particular asking about their works, and is that in relationship to the literature, like when we were talking about nonfiction work, because I do think that at least with Chinua Achebe, even Things Fall Apart, like there, and then Chinua Achebe also has another novel, I think, which was thinking about Nkrumah's overthrow. So I mean, like a lot, but that's the thing, like a lot, maybe that's why, when I said earlier, a lot of the African and third world literature like don't do these like neat tie in a bow happy endings. And I think maybe part of that is because a lot of the literature that comes out of those experiences is like them sort of contemplating their human predicament in colonial societies and in post-colonial societies. And so, I mean, in that regard, I find it useful in the same way that I find the historical fiction of, Tananarive Due and Toni Morrison. Like, I mean, Toni Morrison is doing all this work navigating like our personal inner thoughts on colorism. Even the fact that like Beloved is like inspired by the story of Margaret Garner having tried to kill her children rather than allowing them to be re-enslaved. Obviously there's this whole other kind of story that happens around it, but I mean, obviously there are some Black fiction writers who write things that are just completely unconnected, but I do think that a part of what makes Black African third world fiction compelling to me is the way that they are always still sort of thinking about our predicaments as colonized, enslaved, formerly colonized and enslaved people.
The Negro artist in the racial mountain. We ain't writing about no fucking flowers. Or are we?
You know, made me think. I saw that Tonga won that award, and then in like in the little video there, he was like, "I fully hope that after the revolution, I'm the best describer of flowers and mountains and whatever. But until then, like I have to be, concerned with other kinds of things." And then I think that's really true. Like this all these artists who are like, I'm not a black artist, they just want to be like, bruh, shut up, like go somewhere.
Mm-hmm. 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 See, Matthew, I'm glad you corrected that because I thought you was hating. I'm like, it's not just Marxist, Leninist, feminism. It was liberal feminism. But anyways, y'all, we done. Holler at your girls. I don't know who's coming. Hopefully, Kiese will be on the next one.
Yeah.
I feel like he dodging me.
Oh.
Cause I'm like, when you coming to the podcast? Nothing. Then I commented he did a talk with Mark Lamont Hill, and I'm like, the guys, and he's like, it's us, and I'm like, nigga, I know you saw the other one. So I'm just gonna keep circling back, like I know you saw the other message. But all right, y'all.
All right,
Until next time.
peace.